I'm 30 now. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I was into really weird stuff. There's a few local shops that sell unusual oddities and antiques in my town, like art made from dead animals, skulls, pickled specimens, things like that. I started pickling my own specimens around age 20, when I figured out that it wasn't that hard. I had some articulated skeletons, but stuff that I was really interested in was supposedly cursed stuff. I bought things people claimed were cursed on eBay, and even drove to different states to buy things from people that they claimed were haunted. I bought 3 different diebuck boxes supposedly cursed from eBay. I bought numerous haunted dolls, whatever I could find. I had some weird taxidermy items too, like a couple 2-headed baby chickens, a 2-headed snake, stuff like that. I had a few things that I wasn't supposed to have either, but I won't get into that. Long story short, nothing weird ever happened. Not a thing. I never had one unusual, creepy experience with any of this stuff. I should start this off by saying, I've never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a skeptic, because I think to use that term you have to go into something deciding that it isn't real and operate from that perspective. I'm fine with saying I have no idea what it is and I can't explain it. I won't say that I don't believe in ghosts, because I really don't know what a ghost is or what it's supposed to be. I've always been into aliens, and was really obsessed with them when I was younger, but still never fully believed in them. I just kinda liked the idea of them. I'd never seen one, or seen any real proof of one, despite poring over documentary and late-night History Channel binges. So, on the subject of all things paranormal, you might could say that I'm a fox molder and that I want to believe, but never really did. Anyway, needless to say, after the following series of events, my mind is quite a bit more open. Though I won't pretend that I can tell you exactly what was going on. So I'm around 21 years old and I'm working at Walmart at the time. We had these steps that we would smoke on that were outside the tire shop that would lead up to another parking lot for a different building. I went out to smoke one day and was by myself and sat at the top of the stairs. As I was smoking, I noticed a paper bag sitting kind of underneath the bushes that were there. I don't know why, but I looked in it. I was expecting to find some empty beer bottles or something, but inside of the bag was a porcelain lamb. It wasn't particularly creepy looking, to be honest. It didn't have bleeding eyes or whatever. It just looked like something that would be on your grandma's shelf. There was a red ribbon around its neck, and it looked really new. When I picked it up, there was a note underneath it in the bag. The note said, "Take me home. I'll be a good little bitch, I promise." I'm not even kidding, it really said that. It was written in red ink and looked like female handwriting. Really neat. It was written on a piece of torn out standard notebook paper. I know how stupid and cliche that it sounds, but that really is what it said. Of course, being me, I brought the thing inside Walmart and stashed it under a register because I was totally gonna take that home. I showed it to my friend who was working there and was kinda like, "Dude, look what I just found outside. Look at this note." And he was like, you should definitely not take that home." But of course I was gonna take it home. I lived for that kind of thing. Anyway, as soon as I set it down, I realized that it was actually a music box, because I jarred it enough, I guess, to make it start playing. I looked at the bottom of it, and it had one of those metal twist pins that you wind up and it plays a tune. I turned it, and it was the least intimidating melody ever. It wasn't creepy at all. I was actually getting legit disappointed, because if you wanted to pull a prank on someone with some scary object, this thing was doing it all wrong. I'm not sure what the melody was. I'd never heard it before, but it was in no way ominous. Fast forward to the end of the workday. I get in my car, come home, and show my then girlfriend. She was into all the same weird things that I was, so she was equally excited about this bizarre discovery. We cleared a space on our dresser for it, and from then on we just referred to it as the lamb. Things started happening immediately, like the next day. Me and my ex didn't have a great relationship, and I spent most of my time in the living room while she hung out in the bedroom. I'd work until around 11 at night and get home and stay on my computer playing games until around 3 a.m. Then, once she was asleep, I'd go in the bedroom and go to sleep myself. This way, we didn't really have to spend that much time together, and we both quietly preferred it that way. So, the very next day, I'm sitting in the living room and I hear a rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I could see the entire kitchen from where my computer was, and I assumed that it was one of our cats messing with something, but both cats were actually on the floor staring at the kitchen just as confused as I was. The sound seemed like it was coming from the top of the fridge, and it was like it was rustling around the cereal boxes and bags of chips and such that were up there. I assumed it was a mouse because we had found one in there before and went over to the kitchen to check for it. I turned on the light, and as I walked in the kitchen, I heard the Grudge noise. I've only seen The Grudge once because it was one of the only films that ever actually scared me. I'm not easily frightened, and I generally don't care that much for horror movies, but something about the long, frog-like, gurgling croak sound of The Grudge freaked me out when I was younger. The only similar thing that scared me recently was the screaming bear in Annihilation. Anyway, I start walking toward the fridge and I'm totally hearing the Grudge noise. Just to reiterate, this is only impactful because this is literally one of the only things that I've ever been scared of, and it was coming directly from the top of the fridge where the rustling sound had been. I froze dead in place, and so did my cats. They did not want to go anywhere near that. I had no idea what to do. I was literally on the verge of passing out. So I tried to articulate this in my head, and I decided that the fridge must be broken, that a fan or something in it must be grinding. I crammed that thought into my head, and I sat back down in my chair and put on my headphones. I did leave the light on, I'll admit. Normally, I sat in total darkness. I was really trying to convince myself that the fridge was making that sound, but I was finding it incredibly hard to do so. I was also in panic mode, and I was thinking, what do movies and ghost shows and stuff say? Don't acknowledge that it exists? So I became the dad in every horror film, and I just said, the fridge is broken, and went back to playing WoW while on the verge of jumping out of my own skin and using my headphones to drown out the noise. I actually sat there for way longer than I normally even played WoW because I was genuinely terrified to either move or take my headphones off. I had this horrible thought in my head that as soon as I removed my headphones, I would hear the noise like right next to my ear and turn, and some old woman would eat my face or something. I had no idea how long it went on or when it stopped. I literally sat there until sunrise. I never went to sleep, and I used an Elvis playlist and chatting to my guildmates in WoW to distract me as best as I could. But I literally just sat there frozen in terror the entire night until the sun came up and my girlfriend woke up. She came in the living room around 8 a.m. and was pissed off at me because I never went to bed. She complained that I played games too much, even though we both knew she didn't want me around any more than I wanted to be around her. But our relationship issues aside, she was badgering me about being on the computer all night, and I just said, I don't want to talk about it. And she let it go. She softened up quite a bit, looked a little confused, but I think that she could tell I was freaked out. Then she proceeded to freak me out even further. She showed me her arm and said the cat scratched the hell out of me last night. And she did indeed have what appeared to be a cat scratch running down the length of her forearm. The problem was, she kept the bedroom door closed, and like I said, both of the cats were in the living room with me, and I hadn't moved from that chair. No one let the cat in the bedroom. In fact, when sunrise came, they were still almost in the exact same spot staring at the kitchen that they had been in when I went back to playing WoW. I didn't say anything about it. I just said, oh, dang, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Since I hadn't slept, I called into work that day, even though in reality I really just wanted to leave. So I did an unusual thing, and me and my girlfriend went bowling for the day, then to a movie, then dinner. I was clearly acting weird because we never did anything together, and I was obviously trying to avoid the house. I asked if she wanted to go night fishing, and she finally asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't tell her, though. I didn't want to talk about it. She declined my generous offer to fish in the dark, and we ended up going home. We started our nightly ritual. She retired to the bedroom to watch TV, and I stayed in the living room. The grudge noise started within an hour of me sitting down. This time, as soon as it started, I willed my completely stiff in fear body to get up and walk down the hall to the bathroom. I left my computer running and WoW open, and said I felt like watching TV. My girlfriend again remarked that I was acting weird, and I again declined to talk about it. I couldn't hear the grudge noise from the bedroom. I took some Benadryl and went to sleep when she did, which was hours before I normally went to bed. The next day I went to work, and at around 9 p.m. she called me. I was the manager of the toys department, and had a bit of leeway in using my phone, since no one really supervised me. I answered, and she was on the phone freaking out, screaming into my ear, and I could hear knocking in the background and couldn't really make out what she was saying. But finally, I made out a sentence. She was saying, "There's banging, someone's trying to get in through the walls." I left work and drove home and stayed on the phone with her the whole time, and at some point on my drive home, she left the house and started running down the street. I picked her up in her pajamas as I was driving back, and she again claimed that someone was trying to break in through the walls. She heard banging on all 4 walls of the bedroom. By this point, I was pretty certain I knew exactly what she was hearing, but I still didn't want to say anything about it. I wanted her to calm down, and I told her that it was just animals. I said that I had seen some squirrels going into a hole in the side of the wall and was afraid that we might have them in our walls. Of course, this was entirely made up, but it actually worked, and she did calm down. She didn't know squirrels could live in your walls, and I convinced her that this was the case, and I told her that I would call an exterminator in the morning and have them come out and check on everything. We went back to the house, much to my despair. My squirrel story had worked on her, but that was short-lived. The way our house was set up, we had a bathroom that was connected to our bedroom, but not by a door, just by the wall. So you had to leave our bedroom, and the bathroom was the next room on the right. So the bathroom wall and our bedroom wall were the same wall. Make sense? Anyway, we got inside, she went to the bathroom and immediately started screaming again. I went in there to see what she was screaming at, and it looked like a tiger had been clawing at the bedroom wall. The one connected to our wall. The wallpaper was torn off about 6 feet high, and there were large gashes in the drywall beneath it. Reminder, this is all about 4 days into having this lamb. At this point, we got in the car, and I told her about the sound I had been hearing. Her initial reaction was that we needed to get rid of the lamb, but something told me that I couldn't. She wanted to just donate it to a thrift shop or something, but I had this weird sense of unease about doing so. I felt like we couldn't just get rid of it that way. Like someone had to know what it was and want to take it from us. I can't explain why I felt that way. I just did. At this point, we did what you probably would not expect, and we actually just lived with it. Like, this went on every day. We had rules about it. The first rule was that we never talked about it in the house. We never even mentioned it. We pretended that the lamb did not even exist. It was like that episode of Family Guy where they had a giant octopus living in the house and just no one wanted to talk about it. When we had something to say about it, we would always say, "Let's go for a drive," and the other person would know what that meant. The clawing at the bathroom wall was getting deeper all the time. Eventually, there was a huge hole in the drywall, and it was starting to claw through the drywall that was connected to our bedroom. That was when I really started to freak out. For about a year, we lived with everything. We just ignored it and pretended like nothing was happening. Every night, I sat with the grudge noise. Things would fly off of shelves, doors would slam. Straight up paranormal activity, BS, every single day. One of the worst ones was one of our pickled specimens jars just exploded. It was a bird that we had had for a while, and the mason jar exploded on the mantel in the living room. Glass went everywhere, and it took hours to find it all. The bird itself also completely exploded, sending body parts splattering around the living room. It was hell. And I had a few friends that I would tell about it every day when I came into work. Like, they would ask for updates on what the lamb had been doing, and I would tell them whatever freaky story we had for the previous day. It was a daily occurrence at that point. But then, it got to a point where we couldn't ignore it anymore. My girlfriend was waking up with bruises and scratches almost every day, to the point that it had started looking like she was self-harming. She had a lot of piercings and tattoos, so she wasn't too troubled by the pain, but didn't really enjoy having to wash the blood out of the sheets every day. When it got too much was when I was sitting in the bathroom browsing my phone and I heard a female voice say, "Hey, come here." So I finished my business and walked into the bedroom and said, "Did you call me?" And she replied with, "I was really hoping that was you." This is about 6 months in. At this point, it started talking. Like literally speaking. It had a little girl's voice. I know, again, that's so cliche and stupid sounding, but it would occasionally speak, and we would hear it. We never responded to it. Everything we'd read on the subject told us to never, ever respond. We'd hear it at our door at night, saying things like, "Can I come in, please? Please let me in." At this point, you've probably tuned this out and chalked this up as some kind of excessively long, poorly written creepypasta, but I promise you, it isn't. Her whole family knew about it as well. All my friends did. Everyone knew about this thing. When we had friends come over, they would ask us about certain things that the lamb had destroyed, like, "What's up with the bathroom wall?" And we'd just respond by shaking our heads, and they got the message. Eventually, no one came to our place anymore. They all said that it freaked them out to be there and that they were terrified just to walk inside. Even her parents stopped coming over. Her mother wouldn't even drive down our street. Still, we ignored it. As best we could, anyway. Until one night, I'm sitting on my computer, and a voice right behind me says, "Hey." I thought it was my girlfriend, so without turning around, I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And the voice responded, "Nothing." Then I realized that it wasn't her voice, and I spun around, and nothing was there. I just broke the cardinal rule, and I talked to it. I shat a brick, grabbed my girlfriend, and told her what I did while we drove around in the car. She proceeded to call me an idiot for an hour and asked what we were going to do now. Finally, I decided to Google local paranormal investigators. We contacted a local agency and sent them an email with a more condensed version of everything I've just told you. They responded in a few hours and asked me to send them a picture of the lamb. That was the first time since the day we set it down that I had ever touched it again. I put it in the middle of the kitchen table, grabbed my camera, and took some pictures of it. I sent the pics away in an email, and nothing. Until this point, these people had been responding to me in a matter of hours, and now suddenly, an entire day had gone by. Then 2 days. In those 2 days, everything had escalated tenfold. The house was never quiet now. The grudge noise could be heard outside of the house, and it never stopped. Half the electronics didn't work. The TV barely worked. It would flicker on and off. The power would go on and off. The taps would start running and then close. The garbage disposal would turn on. The doors were slamming and opening non-stop. It was completely out of control, and we couldn't stay in the house anymore. Mind you, I wasn't rich. I'm living on a Walmart salary here, but we got a hotel room. I brought a laptop, and I emailed the paranormal investigators again. They replied to me this time and told me the lady who answers the emails was also their, medium or whatever, and that when I sent her the pictures, she locked herself in her house and has refused to come out for the past 2 days. They told me they were sorry, but that whatever I had was out of their league. So great, right? My house is possessed, and now it's gone apeshit because I talked to it, and the paranormal investigators don't even want to mess with it. I contemplated calling a priest or something, but I'm not religious, and I didn't know if I would have to have faith in the Lord Jesus or whatever for it to work. I contacted another paranormal investigations company in the area and sent them the same pics and basically begged them for help. This time they actually responded and were helpful, and they drove down from about 2 hours away just to talk to us. When they showed up at our house, nothing was happening. It was quiet, and everything looked normal. The doors were all closed, no sounds, nothing. Worse yet, they busted out all these gadgets, and I'm not going to pretend I knew what they did or what they were for. Some had lights, some made beeps, some buzzed, one made little lasers all over the house. They had recorders, microphone equipment, they saged everywhere, walked around waggling electronics at various locations. I don't know exactly what the hell they were doing, but I at least appreciated that they seemed to be trying. But they weren't getting anything. Nothing was happening. I even recorded bits of it on my own camera. Then all of a sudden, stuff did happen. My camera quit working out of nowhere. The battery just KO'd. All their noisy equipment started making noise, and something was over 9,000. There were 3 people, and they started talking to it like, "If you're here, give me a sign." And then they asked it to knock on stuff, and this went on for like 2 hours. Eventually, they wrapped up, and the woman who was with him said that she believed the thing who was inhabiting our lamb wasn't a spirit. She said it wasn't ever a person, and that it was something else. She said that it was pretending to be a child to try and trick us, and the fact that we weren't being tricked was angering it. They left and told me that she would call me the next day. She said she knew someone who might be willing to take it. I couldn't fathom who would want this thing, but my girlfriend and I spent the night in the hotel room again, and I did indeed get a call from the woman the next day. She said that she had spoken with someone called John Zaffis, and that he was excited and wanted the item. I didn't know who that was at the time. She told me he was the haunted collector, but that meant absolutely nothing to me. They said he had a paranormal museum. They came back to the house, got the lamb, and mailed the thing off to him. Later I realized that the dude had a TV show and is the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And that's basically it. Once this Zaffis dude had agreed to take it, everything stopped. We never had another weird incident happen again. I never fixed the bathroom wall, though. We moved out when we split up, and left it like that for the people that we sold the house to. On a side note, I recently, like in the last 6 months, watched the Conjuring movies. In a very short scene, I believe, in The Conjuring 2, there's a shot of the Warrens' daughter sleeping in her bed. On her nightstand is an identical lamb to the one that I had. When I saw it, I almost started crying in terror. My friends and I used to camp a lot in the El Dorado National Forest. We had a spot along Sopiago Springs we used to camp at a lot. One weekend, we decided to go for a 3-day foraging trip. We brought in MREs in case we couldn't find anything, some guns, and some supplies to set up shelter, but that's about it. The first night was chill. We cooked a bunch of crawdads and a squirrel my buddy shot, drank a few beers we'd brought, and slept fine. Next day, something felt weird to me. One of my friends who was with me and I had had some really creepy experiences in this part of the forest in the past, and it felt a bit like those. Forest was dead silent, and you felt like something was watching you. I grew up in the woods, so I know the signs of a predator, but this felt different than a bear or a mountain lion. When night fell, my friends went 200 yards or so up the stream to do some stuff, and I was alone at the campsite. The feeling got even stronger, so I built up the fire nice and big and grabbed a gun. I kept hearing faint voices from the woods in the opposite direction from where my friends had went. They were low and distinct sounds, but they were creeping me out majorly, and my buddies had taken the only 2 flashlights. Poor planning in hindsight. As I peered out into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving 50 yards or so out into the trees. I snapped the rifle to my shoulder and got the scope on it. It was pretty dark, and the only light was from the fire, but I could see the outline of what I was aiming at. It looked human, but was on all 4s, and its arms seemed a lot longer than they should have been. It stood a bit like an ape, but very low to the ground. I only saw it for a second before it loped off deeper into the woods. After I lost track of it, I'd hear light rustling in different directions around the camp, leaves scuffling, the occasional twig breaking. Always away from where my friends went, 180 degrees on the other side of the camp from their departure. I got the sense that whatever it was stalking me. I kept the fire high and was staying sharp, looking out into the woods. But I didn't see it again. My buddies came back about 10 minutes later to find me a paranoid wreck glancing at the tree line with the scope. I told them what happened and they got quiet. Then told me the reason they came back when they did was they started hearing the same shit that I was hearing by where they were, and it had spooked them. We spent the second night of our trip with a big-ass fire and 3 lookouts. Nobody slept that night. In the morning, we broke camp as quick as we could and hightailed it out of there. We never camped in that spot again. I get sleep paralysis, and it's always the same thing. A pair of young twins would appear. One was in a little dress and pigtails, the other with suspenders and slacks. They never talked, let alone gave me their names, so I called them Tammy and Tucker. They had black skin. Not like African American skin, but black as the night, barely more than a living shadow, with yellow eyes that flickered. The way that they moved was just freaky. They changed positions with my every blink, like a weeping angel, or SCP-173. For the first hour, or 5 blinks after I woke up, there was nothing but the darkness of my room. Then my vision would get slightly lighter, like I had an invisible nightlight that just lit up my whole room. On the next blink, my closet door would open, with a little clawed hand peeping out like it had been in the middle of clawing its way out of the dark depths of my closet. On the next, a hand would appear on the floor under my bed, and the one in my closet would be a full arm. My bed had about a foot of space under it, so I imagine a small child would have no trouble fitting underneath. On the next blink, the hand under my bed would be flipped, frozen in time in the middle of clawing at my bed sheets, and I would see Tammy's head poking out of my closet, staring at me. On the next blink, I would see Tucker's head poking out of the underside of my bed, and Tammy would have moved onto the ceiling, on all 4s, her head broken around, just to stare at me. And then, on the next blink, Tucker's head would be upright, his chin resting on my bed staring at me with his flickering eyes, and Tammy would be closer. On the next, Tucker would be at the foot of my bed, on his knees, staring at me, and I would be able to feel his weight. Tammy would be in the middle of my room. On the next, Tucker would be sitting on my thighs and Tammy would be at my bedside. And on the final blink, I would see their mouths open almost as wide as their heads, revealing rows upon rows of pearly white teeth, curved like daggers, ready to sink into my flesh, so close to me that I could feel their breath, cold as ice, on my face. Then, with the last blink, they would be gone. No traces of them left, except for the bruises that appeared on my legs the following morning. One of the many reasons I would have trouble falling asleep is that once the paralysis started, my eyes wouldn't allow me to surpass the amount of time that the twins wanted me for, and I couldn't just rapidly blink for them to go away. It was as though my eyes were being held open against my will. Once the paralysis wore off, about 4 blinks after the twins left, I wouldn't be able to make a sound until I drifted off to sleep. My family and I lived at a large property called Gladstone Villa in the former mining town of Bargoed, in the Caerphilly County borough of the South Wales Valleys in the UK. From 1969 to 1978, we experienced activity that simply defied rational explanation, such as lights going off and on. We witnessed electrical cables being pulled, and my grandfather Bill claimed to have had a glass bottle thrown towards him as he entered the main bedroom, missing him by inches. I didn't personally see this myself, but I still recall the time he came from there with the broken bottle in his hands, and he told us what happened. There was the occasional sighting, but this was very rare indeed, so rare that in all the 9 years I was there, I never once saw it. But I did hear it many times in the bedroom. It's still worth mentioning that my mother, Caroline, saw it on at least 2 occasions. There were also regular footsteps heard in the main bedroom every evening. Sometimes during the day we'd all be downstairs watching TV. One of us would turn the volume down to hear it more clearly, and my grandfather Bill would point to the ceiling and say, "He's by there," or "He's by there now," trying to make out where the footsteps were coming from exactly. There were 5 members of the family that were living at the Gladstone Villa. My maternal grandfather was William Higgs, known as Bill to family and friends, a retired miner who worked at the local colliery. He was a short, bald man who liked nothing more than to listen to his country and western LPs, Johnny Cash, Glen Campbell, and so on. He also liked westerns on TV that starred John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. My maternal grandmother was Rita Higgs. She was a short woman who was a housewife. She was completely teetotal, but liked to smoke. She also liked collecting garden gnomes and liked watching soap operas on TV. My mother, Caroline Dexter, met my father at the local bakehouse on Baldwin Street. She was day shift regularly, and my father worked the night shift. He would stay behind to make her a cup of tea and chat. They dated for 3 years before they got married on Monday, the 1st of April, 1968. The Beatles were number 1 with Lady Madonna. They did not get a place of their own, but they decided to live with my grandparents at Gladstone Villa, which was in Cardiff Road. I was born on August 24th, 1969, when everyone was listening to the latest number 1 in the charts, Honky Tonk Woman, by the Rolling Stones. It was soon after that my mother said that strange things started to happen. I was just a baby when she said it all started off rather quietly, like small tapping here and there, but nothing too noticeable. But in time, the activity gradually increased. One time, my mother said the family heard a noise like someone jumping down from the attic and onto the landing. Naturally thinking that someone was trying to break in, they went to see what was going on. When they got there, they found no one, but the latch to the attic was open. Whatever it was eventually occupied itself in the main bedroom, which incidentally was my grandparents' room. It soon made its presence felt by walking around the bedroom, and the sounds of dragging could be heard. One day, my mother went upstairs to that bedroom to get my father up for work so he could be ready for his night shift. When she got there, she was confronted by the sight of the ironing board placed on my father's torso as he slept. When he awoke, he was astonished to find the situation he was in. He suspected my grandfather Bill was playing pranks, but in time he knew my grandfather was not responsible for it, and he told his work friends what was going on, and it got around town that Gladstone Villa was haunted. My parents separated in 1972 and my father left Gladstone Villa, but it wasn't because of what was going on at the villa. It was just a breakdown of the marriage. They finally divorced on the 25th of April, 1975. The British band, the Bay City Rollers, were number 1 in the charts with Bye Bye Bay. Again, very apt. It would have been amusing but for the fact of what was going on there. I was barely 2 years old, so I have no memory of my father living at the villa. But he would come to see me every Saturday to take me to see my paternal grandparents and to the local cinema. Great times, even though the paranormal activity still continued. As I got older, too, I witnessed the activity for myself. I actually saw the poltergeist activity. I watched electrical cables being pulled by unseen forces. I saw the lights going on and off, and when my grandfather Bill would play records on Sunday as the family did dinner, it would turn the music off. It took exception to the British band Slade and any religious TV shows my grandmother Rita would watch. The local police were also involved. I remember them popping their heads into the attic, hesitating and not going in, but they suggested it was my father playing a prank on the family. A family friend, Mrs. Ivy France, she was more of a friend to my grandmother Rita, she was very skeptical when my grandmother told her that Gladstone Villa was haunted. I can remember Ivy going into the main bedroom, looking around and saying it was vibration from the traffic outside causing it, but she was soon to change her mind when she experienced it for herself. It was then she suggested that the local press be contacted, and a medium. The medium was John Matthews, and when he came to Gladstone Villa, he started by asking the family questions. He then began by challenging the spirit to perform by knocking on the ceiling, and sure enough, it responded by knocking back at him. At some point, John went into a trance to try to make contact with it, but he failed to get a name. He later confirmed the obvious, that there was indeed a presence there, and that it was an earthbound spirit, and that it had unfinished business. A priest by the name of Graham Jones was then called to Gladstone Villa. He blessed the property, and after a few prayers, he duly left, and it was quiet for a few short months after that. No incidents. But it did return, and with a vengeance, and this time it decided to show itself. One evening, my grandfather Bill, my mother Caroline, and I were watching television. My grandmother Rita was reading a book, when all of a sudden my mother just so happened to look to her left, and she saw a full, solid figure of a monk standing by the doorway. We did not see this, as we were otherwise occupied, but she later described it in detail as a monk in typical brown habit, complete with hood over the head so she didn't see the face. It sounded very much like a 16th century Benedictine monk. Fred Davies was a friend of my grandfather Bill. They worked together at the local colliery, and he would visit most evenings. Fred was a slim man who would wear a flat cap and glasses, and smoked homemade cigarettes that hung from his lips as he spoke. He would sit in his favorite chair by the open fire and talk to the family and watch TV with us. One day, Fred was with us, in his casual place by the open fire. I was quietly playing with my toys by the sideboard. It was tranquil, when all of a sudden there was one very loud bang. It was so loud that Fred ducked his head and I ran to my mother for comfort. When it was gone, we all went upstairs. My grandfather, Bill, would always be the first and I would be the last. When we went to that bedroom, we found nothing that could account for that noise. Fred later told us that he ducked his head as he thought it was going to come through the ceiling. Fred told us of another experience he had at Gladstone Villa. My grandfather Bill liked to look out the landing window that overlooked Cardiff Road and into the Bargoed town centre. This time Fred joined him, and he said that he felt something brush past him, but when he looked, there was nothing there. The most frightening experience I had was when I was alone in that particular bedroom. I made sure the light was on. It was very quiet as usual. I was lying on the bed facing the window that overlooked Cardiff Road when I suddenly felt something heavy pounce on the bottom of the bed. I heard the bed springs go just once, and I felt the bed bounce. I didn't look straight away, but when I did, there was nothing there. I went downstairs to tell my family, and we all went back up. We saw distinctive paw marks on the bed, like that of an animal. I later found out that my grandfather had a black Labrador dog called Toby, who died before I was born. My grandfather Bill and my mother Caroline claimed to have heard a baby crying there, but as I didn't hear it at the time, I took very little notice of what they said. The activity got so bad that my mother, grandmother, and I slept downstairs with the lights on. It was only my grandfather Bill who was supposedly brave enough to sleep in the bedroom itself. It was then that he himself had yet another experience. He told us that he was lying on the bed when all of a sudden he couldn't move. He couldn't even shout for us to help him. This could well have been sleep paralysis, but he said that he heard something in the room with him. My grandmother Rita had her own experiences. One day she went upstairs into that room to get my grandfather up when she saw the boiler door open wide by itself. She didn't stay there to see what it was, but she rushed out. Another occasion, she said she had the sense of something pulling from under her foot, as if she had stepped on someone's gown. We had the ghost for so long that my grandmother Rita gave it a pet name. She called him Johnny, and my grandfather Bill would shout out that name to provoke a reaction, but nothing would happen. Ivy Francis's son, Charles, got to hear about what was going on at the Gladstone Villa, and he came along with some friends, and with my family's permission, they went into the bedroom. It frightened one of his friends, and to this day, his friend still says that it is a spooky place. My mother Caroline had an operation on her and ended up on crutches. The local nurse would tend to her foot. One day she was sitting on a chair when the nurse came, and the nurse knelt down to tend to her, and she told my mother not to hold her. My mother looked at my grandmother Rita in amazement, as she was not holding the nurse at all. My mother made her own conclusions that it was Johnny the ghost that was holding her, so as not for the nurse to hurt her. The only time I heard the ghost being vocal was the time that we were all in the room. One of us wanted to use the bathroom and we couldn't get in there. My grandfather Bill said, "He's behind there." I heard quite distinctively the sound of a Gregorian chant, and that was it. Nothing more. We left in the summer of 1978. When two local businessmen bought the property in Gladstone Villa, was eventually converted into a small hotel and its name changed to Red's Park Hotel. On the night before we moved, there was one final incident that we experienced, as if it knew that we were going and that was its way of saying goodbye. My mother, grandmother, and I got ready to go to sleep. The light was still on, and then we heard the doorknob turning as if someone were trying to get in. At first, I naturally suspected my grandfather Bill, as he was the only one who slept upstairs in that room, and we thought it may have been him playing a prank. I called out to him, but there was no answer. no laugh that would give him away. We then heard our belongings that were packed in the hallway being thrown around. The next day we asked my grandfather Bill if it was him playing a joke on us. He insisted that it wasn't him, and to this very day, I believe him. I had my 40th birthday at Red's Park Hotel in August of 2009 for old time's sake, and it was the female staff that told me about the ghost, and I told them what had happened to me there 30 years before. The staff told me of their own personal experiences, lights going off and on, the odd sighting in a room, a bridge, a bride in white was seen. Again, as with the claims of the baby crying that made no sense to me at the time. I did a thorough research of the property in the Cardiff Road area, and I found out some very interesting things indeed. I found out from the Bargood Library and the local newspaper archives that Gladstone Villa dates back to 1900, and it was named after the former British Prime Minister William Gladstone. I discovered the previous people that lived there. The Kimyett family in 1924, the new married couple Michael and Evelyn Kimyett, and a son named Elvin. He died at the property at just 4 months old, according to the archives of the Cardiff newspaper The Western Mail of that year. This explained the baby my mother and grandfather had heard in that bedroom so long ago. Mrs. Evelyn Kimyett died in 1970, soon after I was born. Maybe this is why all the activity started. I also found that there was a monastery in Baldwin Street, where my parents met and worked, and there's a property directly opposite the former Gladstone Villa property in Cardiff Road dating back to the 16th century. It is now a public house called the Rafa Club. A priest hide is said to be there, but it's sealed up. This explains the monk that my mother saw. What I have said here is true. I wouldn't share this if I couldn't possibly back this up, and I have used real names, as I have nothing to hide, and all I have said can be verified by the family of those people that I mentioned. Sadly, some of the people I've mentioned are no longer with us. I challenge any hardened skeptic and firm non-believer, and I can assure them that they will indeed, most certainly, question their belief system. Of this, I have no doubt at all whatsoever. In fact, I am 100% positive. I want to preface this by saying that I generally consider myself to be a rather skeptical person, and have written off most of cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as straight up bunk until this event. I try to see if there's a realistic reasoning behind most encounters and stories, if that makes sense. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this story. It was the late summer of 2005 in Northeast Ohio. I was heading into my junior year of high school. I was spending the night over at my best friend's house, and we decided for the hell of it to just go crash outside for the night, with just sleeping bags. It was a peaceful enough evening. The weather was nice, balmy, kind of warm, and the air rang with the pleasant symphony of crickets and far-off spring peepers. Skies couldn't have been more clear, as it was that special sort of feeling in the air where you were far enough away from the last time it rained that the air didn't feel heavy anymore, and actually felt inviting instead of humid and miserable. This was as close to a picturesque summer evening as you could get. Everything was blanketed in the dark blue elegance of the evening light. Falling asleep was easy enough. This was a year that mosquitoes were remarkably in pretty low numbers, making sleeping unprotected with just a sleeping bag simple for once. Eventually, as bad luck would have it, I had to answer the call of nature, so I was roused from sleep to do so. My buddy's yard was a fairly large-sized one with an area of woods bordering most of it. After finishing, I staggered back over to my sleeping bag and noticed that my friend was not in his. We were staged a few feet apart in case a bear came and got someone in the middle of the night or something. It would leave enough time for the other one to run to safety. You know, bro stuff. In any case, I catch him in my peripheral vision just kind of standing along the side of a shed that was in his yard. I wasn't kidding when I said that this night was picturesque. The sky was so unnaturally clear that the starlight and what little of the crescent moon we had left led to quite a bit of light despite being in the dead of the night itself. However, the area where we chose to pee, with the shed included, happened to be nestled along the part of the yard that was the thickest with trees, leading to a large portion of the yard still being under heavy shadow. Kind of funny to think about, isn't it? Having a well-defined area of shade in the dead of night when you expect everything to be dark. Oh, have I mentioned that at this point it was also suspiciously quiet? The idyllic chirping of the frogs and crickets that had earlier ushered me to sleep was now nowhere to be heard. I hadn't realized it when I first woke up to do my business, but it was quiet the whole time since I had woken up. Honestly, the fact that it was so quiet may have been why I woke up in the first place, on top of answering nature's call. Focusing my attention back on my friend, I'm noticing that he's still standing by the shed. He was around the corner away from me, so I had to approach him from behind, and thankfully it seemed he was going to be done using the bathroom. And thankfully it seemed he was done going to the bathroom as his pants were up. "Hey, what are you doing just standing around there?" I ask as I circle around and approach to his left. I didn't even need to wait for an answer before I immediately saw what had him frozen. Roughly about 30 feet away, hidden among the thickest area of forest in the yard, way back behind the shed, it stood. I'm not the greatest with words, so please bear with me as I try my best to describe what befell my eyes. This creature was perhaps a few inches taller than myself, and I was 6 foot at the time. However, that's where the similarities end. It stood on 2 legs with a hunched posture, as it appeared to have had its shoulders raised up with its head leaning slightly forward. It had arms, but the forearms were a bit longer than the upper arms, culminating into sickly-looking hands ending in long points, almost like claws. Though bathed in starlight and shadow, I could discern the skin of the beast was about a dark blue, dark grayish color. The head itself was mostly obscured by the shadows, but retained a general humanoid appearance. I couldn't make out a mouth or a jaw, but the most unnerving thing about it was that its eyes glowed red. Well, perhaps glowed is a bit of a sensationalist term. It actually looked more like the red eye effect from old photos. However, it definitely illuminated the area immediately around the eye sockets. So perhaps illuminate is the better term. This creature was so sickeningly frail and thin in build that there was no way it could have been a neighbor fucking with us, as it didn't even seem physically possible for something so thin to even be able to support weight on such a frame. And then it started moving. At this point, my fight-or-flight response told me to go screw myself, and I stood frozen in fear, just like my friend. The beast, already a horrific bastardization of the human form, now grotesquely bobbed its body up and down, as if attempting to take off in flight. I didn't notice it before, but there appeared to be a sort of cape behind its back. Though I say cape, it appeared to be of a ragged, fleshy texture, as if the skin on its back was flayed off and was dragging behind its arms. This sickening flesh cape waved with each flap of its arms, giving the illusion of wings. But that wasn't even the worst part. It emitted a noise. This wasn't a growl or a roar or even a scream. The sound it made was akin to a raspy inhale, like someone deeply out of breath. However, it still wasn't quite like that. There was like a sort of reverb to its breathing. It echoed quietly, yet still managed to be one of those sounds that you feel in your bones. Each graveling breath raking its claws into your very soul as you're already frozen in horror. This dance felt like it went on for hours, but in reality it was only a few brief moments that passed. Our bodies finally made enough adrenaline that we were able to bolt and sprint to his house. We talked about it a few days later, but after a point just didn't feel like reliving it anymore. Until we researched what cryptids were and settled on the idea we came across, and decided that people would think we were just full of it, and decided to not bother talking about it at all. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered, but this experience has subconsciously kept me terrified of being in wooded areas after dark for all these years. In fact, last weekend my wife and kids and I were camping at a state campground, and it was the first time I had been outside at night in the woods since that day, and I was scared all night long. Thankfully, nothing happened, and we had a nice weekend. But it's crazy that this experience has affected me for so long. My wife was the only other person I shared this experience with, and at first she laughed it off, thinking I was kidding, until she saw how solemn that I got when I talked about it, and could see that it clearly was not a joke to me. She then confided in me that she's experienced her own paranormal things. So that's fun too. Superficially, I would say it resembled what people have described as the Mothman, but I never actually saw it take flight, and the eyes didn't glow nearly as bright as reports made it out to be. Also, the wings only looked like wings when it was flapping its arms, and I doubt that it could have actually flown with those raggedy skin flaps. But I'm definitely not going to be trying to figure it out. The only other guess was some kind of crawler, maybe, but I never saw it make any other action aside from the bobbing and arm waving. I have lived in my apartment for 3 years now, and other than things falling randomly that I would usually blame on my cats, I have never experienced anything paranormal. My boyfriend claims to see white lights at night in our bedroom, but I don't know. I feel there is always a logical explanation for things. Yesterday, I felt particularly spooked in my apartment, and I felt like someone was behind me, like felt a presence. But also, I am a fat baby when it comes to these things, so I never take myself seriously. Anyway, this is where it gets weird. That night, my phone rang. I was expecting a call from my best friend, so I pick up and say hello. What I heard was a doll-like voice, laughing and giggling. She has a 1-year-old daughter who does not sound like that, but I just assumed it was her, so I was like, "Aw, hi," all the while being creeped the F out and wondering what her daughter, who goes to bed at 8, was doing up at 12 a.m. Then it quickly cut to my friend and she was like, "Was that you? What are you doing?" Tell me, are you joking with me? I felt the blood leave my face. I was like, no, what did you hear? Thinking she heard the same thing, or maybe some static. She was in shock. She told me she heard a demonic man voice say, hello, clearly, and then cut to me saying hello. We spent the next few minutes arguing, as she thought I was joking with her and I thought she was joking with me, even though she was not the type of person to do something like that. We established that it could have just been a weird glitch or something and left it at that. I am so spooked from this, though. Has anyone experienced something like it? I never heard a sound like that in my life, other than maybe in movies. I'm glad she heard something too, because I feel like no one would have believed me. I don't usually get static or anything on my cell phone. Neither of us were watching something on it beforehand, and the sounds we heard were clear as day. Help me find a logical explanation. I recently had an experience that I'm just not sure about. I tried explaining it to my sister, and I can't even begin to put into words everything that happened and how I felt. So recently I went on a bit of a road trip and visited a bunch of places in the Southwest, Utah and Colorado, Arizona, and Southern California. I stopped at a park in Colorado that I hadn't initially planned on going to, but had never been to, a place well known for its Native American history. It was absolutely beautiful. Honestly, it was amazing and humbling to see the history of the people there. It made me realize that there was so much more about American history than the rather Eurocentric view of colonialism that I was taught. Anyways, like I said, it was amazing. Given that this was November and very off-season, half the park was inaccessible and attendance was minimal. There were other people, but overall it was very quiet. I had been viewing some building ruins atop the mesa, one huge multi-room building, and not that far away another large building with a very large kiva in the middle, and on the southern side of the building, number 2, was a solstice carving on the wall. I was walking around the smaller solstice building, as there was a couple walking around the large building, and I enjoyed the quietness of being alone. And when I went to the large building, they went to the solstice building, and then they left and I was going back to the solstice building to get some more pics of the solstice marker. I was now alone. It's hard to describe exactly what I felt and how everything went down, but I'll try. It was a pretty nice day, temperature in the upper mid-50s. I'm from the Midwest, so that's still shorts weather to me. Some light small clouds, but not many, pleasant breeze, and a few birds chirping away, and more than a few chipmunks all over the place. As I walked around the solstice building, everything just became still. Like the wind stopped, the animals went silent and disappeared. It was just weird. There was a large, darkish cloud that came kind of out of nowhere and just hung there. There was a weird heaviness all over. And then there was this smell like what I thought was just a dead animal. Like that sickly sweet smell of rotting meat. I assumed that there was just a dead deer or rabbit or something nearby that the wind had been blowing the smell away, but the wind was gone and everything was just still and heavy. As I reached the solstice marker wall, I noticed that on top of the wall, mind you, the walls are only 2 foot high or so, there was a piece of pottery. I swear that this pottery had not been there before, and it wasn't there in any of my first set of pictures looking back. It was a large, broken piece, but now that I think back, it was really clean. The blacks and the whites were incredibly clear. I went and picked it up to get a closer look, and it was really beautiful. A kind of stair pattern and then an angled set of lines. It was really pretty, but it felt off, oddly heavy for its size. I wanted to keep it, and I wanted to take it, and just kept staring at it for what felt like, God, it's so hard to describe how I felt, but the time stood still, and all I wanted was this pottery. Even now, thinking about it, I still get this weird, longing for it. As I held it, everything was just silent and heavy, and that smell was just so strong. But suddenly, there was this huge raven out of nowhere. Legit, it was on the wall 5 feet away from me, and it was the largest bird that I had ever seen in the wild. This huge raven just cawed and flapped its wings, and I kind of snapped back to reality. Honestly, it was bigger than a freaking condor. Its body was easily 3 foot tall, and its wingspan was just massive. I put the pottery piece down on the wall, back where I picked it up from, and just looked at this bird, and the bird just looked back at me, and I turned and walked away. Just like that, the dark clouds blew off, and the wind returned, and there were other birds chirping, and the smell disappeared. Actually, the smell all but vanished when the giant raven appeared. I got about 10 feet away from where I had been standing, just around the corner of the Solstice ruins, and I turned around to see the raven, and it was gone. I didn't hear it flap its wings to fly away, and I didn't see anything in the sky, not even a shadow on the ground. It was just gone, and so was the piece of pottery. It was no longer on the wall. I went back to my car and headed back to the visitor center, as besides being totally weirded out over what had happened, it was getting late in the day and I had a fair bit of driving to do to get to my next stop down in Arizona. I had a good 35 minutes drive back to the park entrance to reflect on what had happened and how strange I had felt. Honestly, I felt like I had downed a bunch of Benadryl. I was so foggy until the raven showed up. Even now, I just really can't explain everything that I felt. When I got to the visitor center, I was the only person in the visitor center proper besides the employees, and one guy was just leaving as I entered. In the gift shop, I was getting a mug. I get a mug from each park I visit, and was talking to the park ranger and the cashier, who was an older American Indian woman, about how awesome that the park was, and how I wished that I had learned more about these cultures in school, etc. when I told them about the piece of pottery. I also said something like, "Oh yeah, up at the far view sites, there's a dead animal too. When the wind dies down, you can smell it." And the park ranger and the cashier quickly looked at each other, and then back to me. The cashier asked me if the smell had come before the piece of pottery, and I said yeah, that the wind had stopped and that the animals were all quiet, and I basically told them everything I said above, minus the intense urge to steal the piece of pottery, and they just looked at each other a few times and kept quiet, except when I told them about this huge raven and how it appeared. The cashier let out a gasp. When I finished my story, they had a few questions about the timing of things, how long everything lasted, and in what order everything had happened, and they asked me to describe the pottery and stuff, and all of a sudden the cashier said, "Would you like some tea?" I love tea and was like, "Yeah, actually that sounds wonderful, thank you," and she went and got some. The ranger and I walked back towards the employee break room down the hall past the artifact restoration exhibit, and she asked where I was and what I knew about the area, and I told her about how truly minimal my knowledge was about the native cultures, even those closer to my Midwestern home. When the cashier returned, she handed me a cup of sage tea, and she asked if I was honest about what had happened. I was really confused, and said yeah, and she told me to drink. The tea kind of tasted like a no-salt vegetable stock. I wished then that I had had some honey and lemon. Then they told me about what they think that I had been near. Apparently they hear a few different stories concerning skinwalker activity throughout the year, but none where someone sees the raven, and that's why they're telling me this. The cashier proceeded to tell me a bit about skinwalkers and how sometimes they curse objects to lure unsuspecting people in. She also said that the fact that the raven had appeared and removed whatever enchantments that I felt was very important, that someone greater than us was watching out for me at that moment, because even though skinwalkers can choose many different animal forms, they would never appear as a raven due to the spiritual importance of these birds. She said that if the raven appeared to me, they could share certain information with me that they would never share with anyone. She told me that the sage would help cleanse me of any remnants of the skinwalker's tricks, and suggested that I see a shaman. I had already finished the cup of tea and was getting a little freaked out, but oddly felt more calm after hearing her speak, and I thanked them and left. I tried not to run to my car, but walked very quickly and got out of there. That night, and a night or two later, I had some very vivid dreams, but I can't remember anything of them, which is odd. I usually remember my dreams when I wake up, at least long enough to write them down. But these dreams, even though they woke me up, I couldn't recall them. I don't really know what happened, or if they were just pulling my leg. But once I got home and really started looking into these things, I kind of feel... I don't know. I feel like I'm crazy, because I can't rationalize what happened. Even when writing this, I realize how insane it all sounds, and I still can't even fully describe it. How weird everything got. It's just hard to put it into words. I've had several unexplained encounters which I guess you could say are paranormal. I've never believed in that kind of stuff until the experience that I'm going to tell you now. There's a creek below my house where me and my friend would go to hang out when we were kids. It was away from everyone, where we could do whatever we wanted to. We'd normally build a fire and just chill and bring a radio so that we could listen to music. One day I decided that we should go fishing since we never have down there, and there's a bunch of deep spots that are perfect for it. So I get my grandpa's old fishing rod. It was literally a piece of bamboo with a fishing line tied to it. I don't know why, but I just wanted to test it out. He brought his dad's old fishing pole. Both my grandpa and his dad had unfortunately passed away years ago. We pack everything up and head down. We decide first to start fishing near the entrance to the creek because there's a few deep spots there. So we bait our hooks and I throw my line end and he does second. As we're waiting for a bite, my friend tells me someone is coming. I turn around and see no one, yet he says he can hear walking. I keep looking and soon I see a man coming around the corner wearing a hat and overalls. He's very dirty as well, like he just got done working on a car or something. When he sees us, he stops and stares. My friend starts freaking out and telling me to get my knife, since I always carry one. I, however, feel like he wasn't a threat, and just watched him. My friend has always been nervous around strangers and has a fear of them. He begins walking toward us without a word, and stops only a few feet away from my friend. He doesn't seem to acknowledge me and doesn't even look at me and my friend. He stares at him without uttering a word. My friend finally speaks up and says, "Can I help you?" The man simply replies, "Have you seen my wife and kids?" He also calls my friend by name. My friend replies, "No, I haven't seen anyone else down here." The man says nothing and walks away, and as he walks around the corner, I follow him, and as I look around the corner, he vanishes. I see no trace of him, and there's no place he could have gone except straight, because there's fences on both sides. I look back at my friend and tell him he's gone. My friend tells me that's not possible unless he could run extremely fast uphill. I then asked if he knew him because he called him by name, but he swears he has no idea who the man was and has never seen him before. We both decided that was enough for one day, packed everything up, and left. We never saw him again, though we've been down there hundreds of times since that incident. Not long ago, however, I stumbled upon a gravestone hidden in thick grass at the same creek. It was a man who died in the 1970s, who was also a Vietnam veteran. A few days ago, I started writing a script for a horror film. I was thinking about my experiences as a kid and what frightened me. The scariest thing that I remember is the first thing that came to mind, and also the most recent one that I can recall. When I was 7 or 8, in the middle of summer, I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought it was because I was cold, which was uncomfortably odd because it was summer, and my bedroom is upstairs and insulated. I moved my curtain aside to see if the window was open, but it was closed tight. While I was looking at the window, I noticed a man standing in the street. The street lamp was on his back, so I couldn't see his face, but he was looking toward our house. What I noticed was that he was very tall. I think now that he was probably around 6'7". It scared the crap out of me, so I pulled the curtain over the window and used the tacks from one of my posters to tack the curtain down, since the window didn't lock. I covered my head with my covers, because I knew that my dad would say it was a nightmare and give me a hug before sending me back to bed. I eventually did fall back asleep, but a few hours later, I woke up again. It was still very dark out, probably around 1 a.m. The first thing I noticed was my bedroom door was open, and I always shut my bedroom door because I'm a very private person. I got out of bed and went to go to the bathroom. I made sure as I was leaving the bathroom to close my door. Once I was done, as I was going up the stairs, I noticed that my door was open. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. I went into my room, and my heart dropped into my stomach. My bedspread was torn from my bed. The sheets were strewn across the floor. All my pictures and posters were taken off the walls, and the dresser was emptied onto my bed. I went into my sister's room because it was right across the hall. I felt even worse when I did this because she was fast asleep and all the papers had been pulled out of her desk. I woke her up, shaking her as hard as I could. I told her what had happened, and we both ran downstairs to my dad's room. He helped us search the house, but we didn't find anything. Nothing had been taken, and my sister and I's rooms were the only ones that had been trashed. We both slept in the living room for a few days, because it was by my dad's room, but nothing happened, so we went back to life as normal, and eventually forgot about it, until now. My fiancé first encountered this thing in 2013. He and his friends were on a camping trip up in the woods in Maine. Middle of nowhere, literally. No houses, nothing for miles. They had a small fire going, but due to the rain it was hard to keep it going. They kept hearing something trying to creep up on them. It was kind of noisy and sounded big, but was only on 2 feet. They started throwing rocks in the direction where they heard the footsteps coming from, and suddenly this thing let out a blood-curdling scream. Nothing any of them had ever heard before. He describes it as something that sounds like a fox, but slightly more human. It went crashing through the woods super clumsily, but kept trying to come back. They had to fend it off for most of the night. The second encounter was about 1.5 years later. He was out on a solo camping trip in Vermont, since that was something that he enjoyed. He heard the exact same blood-curdling scream that he had heard the first time. He was just sitting alone in the dark, looking at the stars with no fire or anything, when suddenly he heard the scream again. He quickly packed everything up and just went home. No hesitation. The third time was tonight. He was supposed to go out to my car to grab us a couple bottles of water when he heard the voices. Due to us recently having someone coming onto our property and stealing from our landlords, he went to investigate. He calls me and tells me to let the dog out. As he was sneaking around, the voices turned into a snarling sound. He quickly stopped, turning off his flashlight, and dropped to the ground. The dog was standing next to him. Suddenly he sees two glowing eyes, and it lunges at him. The dog gets excited and starts chasing it. The whole time they're chasing it, it's screaming and running faster than our dog. Even though he was running with a flashlight, he couldn't make out a shape of its body. He says by how far apart the eyes were, it seemed kind of big. He couldn't get a shape or color, besides where its body should be was a slight discoloration of the darkness around it. It kept looking back at him while he chased, and its eyes were just glowing while it screamed. Our dog chased it off into the woods, but luckily she came back. I think it was trying to lure him in by making it sound like voices, but the dog scared it. He said he couldn't get a height because the eye level kept changing from squatting to standing up, and then it started running. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Or knows what this animal or supernatural thing could be? It was in June of 1972 that my mom and dad told me they were taking a couple of our thoroughbred racehorses to Durango, Colorado, where my father owned land, and where we typically boarded some of the animals during the summer. This trip was nothing unusual, as it occurred rather frequently. The only difference this time was that my mother was going with my dad instead of me. I guess Dad figured that at 13, I was old enough and responsible enough to do the morning and evening chores, which consisted of feeding and watering the remaining horses, which numbered about 8. A few cows, 6 pigs, and a coop full of chickens. There were also always a few wounds that needed to be smeared with ointment. These chores were not exactly rocket science, but it did take a while, so I was glad when Lyle offered to come and help me with each evening. He got a kick out of it, as he enjoyed that kind of thing. I, however, leaned more towards the arts, performing magic, singing, playing the piano, and even doing ventriloquism. In fact, I did it professionally by the time I was 12. I had no intention of staying at the house alone while my parents were gone to Colorado. I was very much afraid of the dark, and especially of being alone. It would be years until I discovered why. I was going to spend the weekend with 2 of my best friends, Lyle and Mark Harper. Lyle was a year older than I was, and Mark was a year younger, so I fit right into the middle of the 2. They lived just 3 houses to the west of my house. I can't really call it a house that I lived in. It was one of 4 duplexes that my dad owned. 2 of them were built back in the early 1920s, and the other 2 were newer, as they were built by my dad a couple of years after we moved there in the late 1960s. The 2 old units, A and B, and the 2 new units, C and D, were split down the middle by our long asphalt driveway. The only other building on the property was a very old and very large white stucco garage/shop, which was located behind the units at the end of the driveway. Beyond that old shop was where the corrals and pastures were. With my parents in Colorado, I was in charge of keeping all the animals fed. Darkness was just around the corner, so I took Lyle and we headed to my place. As we entered my driveway, we started walking between the old units and the new units toward the big garage. What made this shop unique were the giant rolling stainless steel doors, one on the left and one on the right, that met in the middle. It created an almost mirror effect, but not quite shiny enough to be an actual mirror. I happened to be looking at the door, noticing how the street light created just enough glow to make our stretched shadows lightly appear on the big metal doors. I commented to Lyle that I wished I was that tall in real life, and that is when it happened. With both of us looking at our very light shadows bouncing to the rhythm of our steps, another shadow, only very dark, no, black. So black that it looked like a thick, inky, one-dimensional entity, ran clumsily across the shiny door from left to right. It was wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed fedora hat. It had a troll-like appearance, all hunched over as though it didn't want to be seen. It scurried quickly in total darkness until it reached the right side of the doors, after which it completely disappeared. We both stopped, frozen in our tracks, trying to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Before either of us could say anything, the thick, dark shadow man trotted back the other direction, once again disappearing as it reached the other side of the doors. Both of our minds instantly realized that nothing solid had run between us and the doors, and that the only way a shadow could be that dark was, well, there was just no way a regular shadow could be that dark. Without uttering a word, we both turned in sync, as though the movement was choreographed, and took off running back onto 8th Avenue. Neither of us stopped until we arrived back at the safety of Lyle's house. Once inside, we ran to his father, Lloyd, who was watching the news on television, and told him that we needed him. We related our experience, and he said that he was sure that there was a logical explanation. I knew, though, that there was not. He walked back to my house with us, and we began to experiment, attempting to recreate a shadow that was as dark as what we had just seen 10 minutes before. It just wasn't possible. Mr. Harper agreed to stay with us while I did my chores in the now dark back pasture area. It would be years later that I would learn about shadow figures and how they operate. Since then, I have been blessed, or cursed, with several paranormal experiences, from full-body apparitions to simply feeling the presence of spirits. I'm not sure why me, but I am grateful. This story takes place in 2017. My then best friend, I'll call her Lex, and I were having a sleepover at my dad's house. I was 16 at the time, her being 17. We often had sleepovers on Fridays where we would eat junk food, watch as much Netflix as possible, and have deep conversations. This night was no different, and so unremarkable that I've forgotten everything that we did. That is, of course, until we were trying to fall asleep in my bed. I remember being completely exhausted, slowly but surely drifting off despite sharing a bed with someone. I was just on the brink of sleep when Lex got my attention. First, she simply asked if I was awake. I grunted in response, signaling for her to continue. It should be said that I was quite literally a minute or two away from unconsciousness, so I didn't pick up on her tone of voice or think much about what she said next. "I'm gonna go use the bathroom downstairs," she told me, getting off the bed. This wasn't normal, her announcing that she would be slipping away to use the restroom, but I was too out of it to be annoyed or curious. Not long after she left, probably no more than 10 seconds, it started happening. Again, I was on the precipice of sleep, so my mind wasn't racing with thoughts or in any state to freak myself out. Nevertheless, I became filled with the feeling of impending danger out of absolutely nowhere. I was becoming very lucid very quickly as dread and anxiety overwhelmed me. I had never felt this kind of acute fear before, nor seemingly out of nowhere. Now wide awake, I opened my eyes and stared at the wall. I opened my eyes and stared at the wall less than a foot away from my face, as I slept facing away from the bedroom door. My heart raced as I tried to understand the situation, but I didn't move. Something told me that moving would be a very bad idea. My room was pitch black as well, so that didn't help matters. All I could think about was how scared I was, and how I hoped that Lex would return soon. I can guess that a few minutes passed like this when suddenly the bed dipped on the side that I wasn't occupying, as if someone were sitting down. Problem was, not only did Lex struggle to get onto my bed due to its height, but my bedroom door had never opened. At this point I was petrified, and I only became more afraid as I felt something against the back of my body. It felt like a person, just gently pressed against me. I thought to myself hysterically that there was no way this was actually happening. I held my breath to better isolate the feeling, horrified to feel the presence moving as if it were breathing, too. In and out, pressed against me. In and out. The atmosphere is still suffocating in the room, filled with what I can only describe as evilness. The aura of whatever was touching me screamed danger. Don't move. I will hurt you. My mind and heart are racing as I try to think of a way out of this. The only balm I have to lessen my anxiety is the fact that I know Lex will eventually return. But what happens then? She wouldn't see whatever it was pressed against me when she entered the bedroom, too occupied with making sure she wasn't disturbing my sleep. So I told myself that once I heard the door open, I would address her and ask her to turn on the lights. After what I would come to find out was about half an hour, Lex finally did return. The second I heard the door open and light flooded into the bedroom, I called her name. She hesitated, her soft voice saying, "Yeah?" I requested bluntly, "Turn on the lights." She did as I asked, and I shot like a bullet from my previous position, whipping around to inspect the area where I had felt the presence. There was nothing. I wouldn't notice right away, but later I realized that the horrifying aura that was plaguing my bedroom had vanished once Lex arrived. It was gone just as suddenly as it had appeared. Still, I was in a state of horror for the next few hours. We watched some cartoons together and decided to sleep with the lights on, but not before talking about what had just happened. Lex revealed to me that the reason she had gone downstairs wasn't to use the restroom, but to call her boyfriend for emotional support. She told me that she had felt panicked, wanting to leave the room to escape from the stifling feeling. Lex couldn't get a hold of him, and spent the next 30 minutes or so trying to calm herself down. In the morning, Lex and I would confide in my dad, the only other person in the house. He was rightly disturbed and told us that he had a nightmare that night. I can't remember what his nightmare consisted of, only that it was a really bad one. My dad is a veteran, so he is not easily spooked, but it left him uneasy. The fact that my dad had a nightmare at all made this whole experience more notable to me. To wrap things up, I want to say that I had improperly used a spirit board a few years before this with a few of my friends at my dad's house. We were children, so we didn't take it any more seriously than any other Halloween game. Nothing of this magnitude had ever occurred before, though. Just this one night. Lex and I were able to acquire holy water from one of the teachers at our high school after she told him the story. We used it to cleanse my bedroom. Nothing strange has happened to me, or my dad, since. A few years back, I had gone out with some friends to the mountains for a camping trip. And by camping trip, I mean everybody gets drunk or high around a fire in the middle of the woods and then passes out in their trucks. I was always the youngest of the friend group, and this took place before I found my taste for mind-altering substances. I'm typically something of a skeptic, and if this had happened nowadays, I'd probably blame it on being drunk. But I was stone cold sober the whole time, which is why I feel so sure of what I saw. We're all out at the campsite, maybe 10 or 15 of us. I'm sitting on someone's tailgate smoking a cigarette when my friend, let's call him John, comes up to me clearly intoxicated. John was the one who I came out to the campsite with, and probably my closest friend out of anyone there. He asked me if I wanted to go on an adventure with him in the woods. I figured that if nothing else, I should probably go with him just to make sure that he didn't drunkenly fall over and hurt himself. Not to mention that even though I didn't drink or do any drugs back then, didn't mean that I was opposed to fun adventures into the forest. So we walked past the tree line that surrounded the campfire and into the dense trees. The moon was out and it was a pretty clear night, so although it wasn't dark, it wasn't pitch black. We came to a clearing that seemed to be made of flattish boulders and rocks. We were looking up at the night sky, and John was drunk talking and I was listening and nodding along with whatever nonsense he was saying. He took a seat on one of the flatter rocks and eventually just laid down and passed out. I tried to jostle him awake, but he just kept mumbling for me to let him rest a while. Since this is usually how John behaves when he's drinking, I complied and figured I'd head back to the campsite and check on him again in a little bit. I go back, talk to a few people, smoke a few cigarettes, and then decide to go and check on him. Maybe 10 minutes have passed. I'm walking back to the clearing where I left him and already from afar noticed that he wasn't in the same spot. I kept going, figuring that he must have gotten up and wandered off somewhere. As I'm walking, I notice a shadow in the shape of a human standing behind a shrub of sorts a few feet to my right. I stop, figuring that it was John messing with me. I said, "Dude, come on, let's go back to the camp." No response. Then I gave him the stereotypical, "Please, you're not scaring me." Still nothing. I moved closer to the shadow and noticed that I couldn't make out any distinguishable features. No shirt logo, no eyes, or any face for that matter. Just a vacuum of black that stood in the shape of a man, hanging out with me in the forest. I backed away, putting it all together that it wasn't John, and I ran back to camp. I checked the truck that John and I drove out there in, and he was sleeping on the bench seat. I did a quick head count, and everyone that I had recalled being at the camp was still there. The only thing that convinces me that this was paranormal was just the sheer absence of light that this thing took the shape of. Just pure darkness. Whenever I tell this story, John always gets chills, imagining that this thing was probably out there with him when he was passed out alone. The general conclusion was that John had stumbled back while I had left him, and I just didn't notice that he had returned. Like I said, I'm a skeptic, so I always try to rationalize these things. But this is the one experience that I've had that I just can't believe was simply my eyes playing tricks on me. I've heard of shadow people, but I always thought those were just what people saw during sleep paralysis. Not out in the wilderness, and not while fully awake. I think my paranormal story began when I was around 5 or 6 years of age. I was a shy and quiet little girl, but nothing in my life was out of the ordinary. I had both of my parents married, and a little brother 3 years younger than me that was sleeping in the same room as me. I don't know exactly how or when it all began, but things started to get weird at night in my bedroom. Every time my mother put me to bed and turned off the lights, shadows would begin to move around and scare me. By shadows, I mean black entities, like little insects crawling on the walls, standing figures with human shapes, even faces. I was so terrified of the night that I had a hard time falling asleep, and I can't recount how many times I had to turn on my little bed light to chase away the shadows that I was seeing. Nothing bad ever happened to me during those days. These shadows were always just passing by or staring at me, even though I recalled some times that were scarier than others. I remembered one particular night when I opened my eyes and there was just a face, centimeters away from mine, staring at me with dead eyes. I was on top of a bunk bed. Every time something scary would happen to me, my instinct was to turn on a light. Everything disappeared with the light, so I made a habit to save myself like this. And now, at 26 years old, I still need to turn on the lights everywhere I go because I cannot feel at ease in the dark. Of course, I told my experiences to my parents at the time, but they did not really take me seriously. I was quite imaginative for my age, so they thought it was just my silly little brain making things up. At the same time, my vision was starting to get bad and I needed to wear glasses. They used to tell me my blurred vision was creating scary monsters with the things in my room. Every time I was seeing the things in my room, I kept repeating my parents' words to soothe me, but I was still so scared, trembling, and unable to sleep because of what I was seeing. I had bad sleeping habits because of that. I had hard times closing my eyes at night, and I always tried to fall asleep before there was no light left in the house. These experiences followed me my whole childhood, but with the years passing by, they were less frequent. The fear of the dark still lingered, but I could sleep more peacefully. When I reached my teenage years, it completely stopped. At times, I was even able to completely forget this part of my life. Funny how I never thought my house was haunted. I always knew deep down that it was my problem to bear. The rest of my family never had any paranormal experiences in this house, and none of them were particularly inclined to hear about my fear of the shadows. Even though I stopped seeing things after my 12th or 13th birthday, I still had quite the instinct for the paranormal, and I was able to feel if a place was bad or not. But I want to make it clear that I was not seeking paranormal thrills. In fact, I was avoiding those things like the plague. I was still very much traumatized, and I did not want to experience scary things like that ever again. So, I cannot recall if it was during my 14th or 15th birthday years, but I had my final, most horrifying encounter. I was on vacation at my friend's grandmother's house. It was quite an old house, and there were 2 beds in this bedroom for my friend and me to go to sleep. I had slept in this room many nights before without anything happening, and nothing during the evening could explain what took place next. I woke up in the middle of the night with no explanation. I don't remember having a bad dream or hearing something. I just opened my eyes in the complete darkness. The feeling of uneasiness crept in very quickly. Something was not right. I could feel it, but I wasn't sure what yet. I finally lifted my head and saw it. Words cannot describe how horrid the thing I saw was, and how terrified I felt in that instant. Just 2 meters away from me, at the end of my bed, stood a man that I can only describe as grotesque. The man had red skin, or so I thought at first, prominent eyes, and an all-teeth smile. It was standing still and staring directly at me. We looked at each other for what felt like hours with no one moving. I was able to see every detail of it. More than 10 years later, I'm able to describe it perfectly to you. Its image is still ingrained in my brain like I was marked by a hot iron. Its red skin was actually no skin at all. It was made out of muscles, and its eyes and teeth were very apparent because it had neither eyelid nor lip. Its face was horribly deformed because there were several metal pieces under its muscles that were coming out at random places. It wore a black leather trench coat. I cannot tell you how terrified that I was. My heart plummeted to my stomach and my body felt an uncomfortable hotness within. It was the first time that I was seeing something so vivid and real, and my instincts were screaming that I was in great danger. I could not take my eyes off of the red man. Somehow I knew that I should not let it out of my sight. I didn't scream or panic, but I frantically searched for the light switch that I knew was within reach. The red man was standing still, just looking back at me. I don't know why, but I knew that it was completely amused by the situation and how scared that I was. Finally, I turned on the light, and I thought that I was saved. Remember how the light always helped me chase away the shadows? Well, this time, it did not fucking work. It was still there. It was still staring at me, and I could see it more clearly than ever. It began to shift away, getting closer to my friend's bed. Speaking of my friend, of course he woke up from the light that I had just turned on. He turned toward me, asking me what was happening. I think he knew immediately that something was very wrong from the face that I was probably making and my eyes locked on something next to his bed. He kept turning his head toward the red man that I was looking at, but he obviously was not able to see it. My friend kept asking what was wrong again and again, more panicked each time he was inquiring. I was so horrified that my lips were sealed, so I was not able to respond. The whole event took less than a minute to unfold, but here I was completely terrified and spooking my friend to death. Finally, the red man began to fade away into thin air. During all this time, it did not break eye contact with me. It did not move its arms or its legs. It just kept staring at me with its eyes with no eyelids and staring at me with no lips. To this day, I have no explanation for it. It was neither a vivid dream nor a sleep paralysis. And I know what I saw. To further validate my experience, let me tell you another weird thing I experienced not many years ago related to this story. After forgetting about this horrible nightmare for a decade, I happened to tell the story to my father. I was still very surprised by how vividly I could recall the events of that night, and how I could describe its face precisely. I was in an almost trance-like state while taking a bath after that, still thinking about what had happened. I was recreating the red man's face in my head. I began to stare at my own face in the mirror, a mirror that was at least 2.5 meters away from me. I stared at myself for minutes without really thinking about it, just having the red man's face in mind. Somehow, a feeling of uneasiness began to stir in me. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was at first. I kept staring at my face, in my trance-like state, until I finally realized what was not right with the situation. I was able to see my face. Remember how I told you my eyesight was bad? Well, it did not improve with time. In fact, it got really bad, and without my glasses, I can't see things clearly at all. And here I am, in my bathtub, seeing things clearly for the first time since my toddler years. I got really spooked, and the moment that I realized what was happening, I saw my vision getting blurrier and blurrier. I don't know what to make of the last story. I just wanted to tell you everything that happened to me. I have my own theories, but, again, I do not seek any truth, and I still avoid paranormal things like the plague. Well, that's about it, folks. I hope my experience was interesting to some of you. It was weird and unsettling for me to put words to these events. I feel like every time I mention these things, I put myself closer to the shadows and the red man that still haunt my nightmares to this day. As I said before, I did not experience anything relevant after my teenage years, but the fear of the dark and what it hides is still here. It's 12:44 a.m., and 10 minutes ago, I saw a ghost. I live in the basement, which is almost finished, so it isn't the creepy, empty stages anymore. It's really comfortable and homey. Today, though, my parents are putting up a new wall separating my room from the laundry room, so that's the change. It's a little uncomfortable tonight, and I do admit that having such an open space where I could see and not see everything is a little spooky, but I wasn't actively thinking about it, and I was actually really relaxed and just scrolling through TikTok on my phone. This is the setup. I have my bed in the middle of the room, my TV is adjacent from me, on, playing Family Guy. I'm facing left, which is facing the laundry room, and the almost built wall. There's a small landing that goes to my sister's room, which is also in the basement. The back storage room, which the light was on, and then the stairs that go up. My fan, which is also to my left, is on. I can't hear a whole lot besides the fan, my phone, and the TV. My phone is positioned almost directly in front of my face, but with what I saw, it was not in my peripheral, it was directly next to my phone's screen, so I clearly saw it. A half-white figure walked past from the landing into the laundry room. I could only see the bottom half of it. It was clearly opaque white. I thought it was my dog at first, so I sat up and called her name a few times, but she didn't come. Then I thought maybe it was my parents and they just couldn't hear me, but I didn't see the laundry room light turn on, or the washing machine or anything turn on. So I turned on my flashlight and called my dog's name again, thinking that she might be getting into something. When she still didn't come to me, I got up with my flashlight still on and turned the bedroom light on. Then I checked everything out to see if it was my dog, and if she was just being silly, or maybe even if it was a cat. Nothing was there, so I got freaked out and went to my sister's room, which her light was on, and the storage room light was on. My sister wasn't in her room, she was in the garage. So I told her what had happened, and she thinks my mind is probably just playing tricks on me since there's changes going on downstairs, and it's a little scary down there right now. Which, I admit, it is, but I was really comfortable, and about to go to sleep. I have been in those instances where I freak myself out, like watching a scary movie or something, and I convince myself that I heard or saw something, but of course nothing happened, and I sleep fine. But tonight it was different. I just know it. As soon as I figured out that it wasn't my dog or my parents or any cats, I began to feel nauseous and my heart started pounding. Now, this isn't the first time a paranormal experience has happened in this house. It's just the first time in a while. Recently, my grandmother passed away upstairs in what's now my parents' bedroom. My grandfather also passed away in this house in the hallway going to the garage. Every paranormal experience we've had, we know that it was one of my grandparents, since it was never malvoyant and we never felt nervous or scared. I'm not saying the spirit I saw was malvoyant. I do believe that it was my grandma, but it still did freak me out, and I did cry. It's only been a month and a half without her, so it's nice to know she's still around. But it was awful timing, Grandma. I'm now sleeping upstairs until my parents finish the wall. Good spirit or not, it's still nerve-wracking to have a paranormal experience. This happened to me a few months ago. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was on my back, and there was a man standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. He was wearing black. He looked very calm. I think he was floating because he was high up in the air. I have always been freaked out about ghosts, but for some reason I did not panic, and I just stared back at him for a few seconds. After he seemed to realize that I was awake, he was surprised and appeared nervous. He then turned away as if he was leaving and disappeared. I never had any experiences with sleep paralysis, so I don't think that this was the reason that this happened. Also, my dog was sleeping next to me, and she did not wake up. Even after he left, I was not afraid. I truly do not understand why. I bought an old antique Asian chest about 15 years ago. It was really lovely. I moved in with my parents while I was in college into the guest house out back. There was no room in the tiny cottage for the chest, so my mom had me put it in the walkway between the back of the house where my young brothers slept and the living room. Everyone, and I mean everyone, hated that piece of furniture. They'd scurry past it as fast as they could to get wherever they were going. Occasionally we would hear knocking or a random door that would just open. One morning my brother Justin and I left and went to run errands and go shopping. When we came back 6 hours later, my mom was raking leaves in the front yard. When we got out of the car, Mom asked, "Wait, when did you come get Justin?" We told her that we had been gone all day. She said, "No, you haven't. I just saw him 2 hours ago. I assumed he'd gone to his bedroom to play video games." I told her that we had been gone since early that morning, and she kept insisting that there was no way. He walked past her. She had said hi to him. She said that he didn't respond to her, but she figured that he had been on a mission to get to his room. When I asked her where she saw him, she said that she was vacuuming in the hallway in front of the chest. I ended up giving it to my older brother, who said that he would hear my nieces laughing and playing in the hallway of his apartment. He said one morning he got up to see the youngest run down the hall into her room, but when he got to her room, she wasn't in there. He threw it out. I wish he hadn't, and I wish that I knew where it was now. This past weekend, my boyfriend came over, and we were hanging out downstairs. I soon got tired, so I ended up going upstairs to my bedroom. I immediately felt a presence following me as I walked up the stairs. It felt as if it were following behind me, and there was something breathing on my neck, the feeling when you know that something is there. Me being scared, I refused to look back. I just plop into bed and face the wall, hoping that nothing happens. I still feel like there's something there, but this time it feels like someone is just watching me sleep. Then it starts to get hot. Even though I was scared, I turned to open the window, and there is a holographic type of ghost hovering over my bed. I turn around again, not getting up. I lay there facing my wall, so uncomfortable for a minute or two. I quickly get the courage to open the window and go lay back in bed, But before I get there, my LED TV starts flashing and changing the color mode. Mind, these lights only turn on when the TV is on because they're connected to my TV's USB, and I was unable to turn them on myself when the TV was off. I quickly grabbed the remote and turned it off. Then, all of a sudden, the empty Starbucks cup sitting on my nightstand table falls off in a weird way, as in it looks as if it were being pushed. I turned on my bedroom light, grabbed my phone, and yeeted out of there. I was so terrified. I've had a few paranormal experiences in my lifetime. My mom and dad said that when I was little, they would wake up in the middle of the night to me crawling around my nursery and saying a man with glowing eyes was playing with me. They believed it was my grandfather who died when I was born a hallway away, but I haven't seen him since. Anyway, my boyfriend used to live in an old farmhouse built back in the late 1800s with roommates. None of them believed in activity, but I asked about the old barns in the house when I was staying there. I always felt unsettled in the house when I would sleep there and often would wake up at around 3:12 a.m. to pee. But one night I woke up at that time and stumbled down the hall to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the staircase, which was creaky and old, and I heard it shift. I stopped at the bathroom door and saw the face of an older man peer around the corner. I jumped into the bathroom and shut the door to pee, but felt goosebumps all up my arms and my back. I didn't feel afraid of him. He looked pretty nervous, but it spooked me really bad. I went back to bed and didn't see him again. The next time I stayed there, I woke up at the same time to pee, and I saw him standing against the wall. But this time, he actually reached his hand out to me and motioned to go downstairs. I cautiously went towards him to see him go downstairs, and I peered around the corner to see him facing the door with his hands behind his back and staring at the open field in front of him. This time I noticed that he was wearing glasses and was older, with a scruffy white beard and dirty pants and boots like he'd been working outside. My boyfriend came down and found me, so I went back to bed, but didn't sleep at all. The last time I saw him, I woke up at 3:12 yet again and rubbed my eyes to feel a really warm sensation around my hand, as though someone with really strong, working hands was grabbing me with both of their hands. But I sat up to see nothing. My heart was beating loud, but I felt safe and calm, and I swear I heard the whisper, "I'll miss you," before I went to look for him. He was in the hallway again, and he tipped his cap before whistling and walking away. I followed him, but didn't see him anywhere, and this was the last night we stayed there before we moved to a different town, into our own home. As crazy as this sounds, I miss him, and he was a sweet soul. I hope the boys that live there don't bother him too much. I asked about him after we left, and visited my boyfriend's friends, and they said their grandfather had died before they were alive, and he was a working farmer whose wife died before him. He loved animals, and wore big bottle glasses. I really think it was him, and that since the boys didn't believe in ghosts, that he just wanted someone to be his friend. I work on oil rigs. I have ever since I was 20, and I'm 33 now. In 2007, I was working for Nomad Drilling. They have since sold out to Patterson, and we were drilling in the Haynesville for natural gas. Anyone who works on rigs knows that the work can take you way off the beaten path from what normal civilization is used to. Some places you're on ranch roads for an hour before you reach the location, and others you're driving on roads canopied by trees in the backwoods of Louisiana. This happened to me in the latter. We were rigging down after finishing a well, and we were on our last night of the 7-day hitch. About halfway through our 12-hour tower. We had pretty much finished, and were making sure everything was tied down securely for the rig move. We killed the light plants, and the driller let us knock off early. This area was accessible outside Houghton, Louisiana, and the lease was actually on the back of the Barksdale AF base, but we had to leave the way we came in. Driving home at 2 a.m. seemed pretty normal at first, and I made it to the blacktop with no issues. The blacktop was still canopied by trees, and other than the lights from my truck, everything was pitch black. Out of nowhere, still basically in the middle of nowhere, this thing appears almost close enough to get hit on my driver's side. Okay, weird. But even more strange, he was leaning at what I swear was an impossible angle for someone to not tip over. Its hands were stretched, reaching towards my truck, and what I could see of the face was morbid and twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck raised, and I gasped it to speed back closer to society. It was about a 2-hour drive home, and I felt off for the rest of the trip. More oddly, I was working over on a separate occasion with one of the crews that work when I'm home, and another hand was talking about a very similar, if not identical, experience. I don't know who or what I saw, and the face could have been a blur from relative distance, speed, and the time I actually saw them. But who is out that late, and why? If someone was broken down, I could see them trying to flag me. But this didn't seem to be the case here. This is a story that happened to me when I was just a fresh graduate, starting my first job at a temp agency. It was 2002, and my job was located in the middle of nowhere and very far from my home. Therefore, I took the effort of doing most of my job in the office till late at night, since I do not wish to come home and continue with work. Rather, that would give me some rest for the remainder of the night. I usually stayed up even later on Fridays, knowing that if I finished the work fully, the weekends would be golden for me. So, this story occurred on one of those Fridays when everyone else had already left. After making my prayers for the night, I continued with my work. There was no one I believed that was in the office, but I felt a presence. Perhaps it was another coworker working late just like me. I took that belief to heart. At one point in time, around 11 I believe, I needed to go to the toilet, which was located at the end of a long, dark hallway lighted only by the green exit sign. I found that the toilet was locked, so I looked to the toilet that is on the next level. I took the staircase, which was lighted by a circular wall lamp, and found that the toilet was unlocked. Thankfully, I did my business and returned back to work. The next part of the story comes in a rather weird way. As I made my way back, passing by the locked toilet, I saw the shadow of someone by the office door beaming from the front light that I had left on. My guess is that either the coworker was about to leave or that she was taking coffee for the night since the pantry is near the entrance. When I got there, there was no one by the pantry or the entrance, so again I went back to my desk. I was trying to finish up that last bit of work when I started to peek through the gap between each desk, trying to see the other person who was working late at night, but somehow, no matter what, I was unable to spot him or her. When I got finished up about 15 minutes later, I decided to get myself a drink from the pantry. Then, the lights went off. Just as I took the can of juice from the fridge, I turned to find myself in total darkness. There was a voice calling out to me, trying to reach me, and I tried to find it. The voice was unclear at the beginning, but soon it became what I think the person was saying, "Help me." The sound was the strongest by the window which was facing the main road that was now deserted. I looked about in the darkness, seeing if there was anyone in distress, and as I did so, I felt a hand touching my shoulder. I turned around, and no one was there. At this point already, I knew that I needed to get the hell out, and so I went to my desk and started packing. Then it came. It came from outside, falling with a piercing scream and with a clear face. The face of a bloody woman. I quickly rushed to the window, opened it up, and looked at the ground, but there was no one. I made my way to the ground floor and to the main road, clutching my laptop and backpack as I tried to search for a cab, but it felt like nearly hours, despite it only being minutes before one came by. What kept me at the edge was the fact that I felt like 1,000 boots were marching toward me, shouting in Japanese commands. I kept my eyes on the road, but occasionally I turned back to see my office building. On the last turn, I saw a bunch of uniformed men with rifles, gray faces bayoneting a bloody woman, stepping on her body, throwing what I believed to be her baby in the air and killing it as it landed on the ground. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran from the scene. So I've been sitting on this story for 3 years, telling some close friends who respond with astonished looks and advise on mental health and think I'm completely insane. It's 11:17 in rural New Brunswick, Canada, and I'm getting in my car to head back to Fredericton from my parents' place in the middle of nowhere. I had just finished up a small gig at a local fair, having had 1 or 2 beers at the show. I'm just pulling out of my parents' driveway onto a dim country road going back to the city when I turn on my high beams to see a tall, lanky, completely black figure standing in the ditch on the right side of the road. I mean, this thing must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It absorbed all light and had limbs no bigger around than a baguette. As soon as I saw it, it started to run up the ditch and across the road in a very fast, very strange, gliding kind of way. I slammed on the brakes and watched this thing run across the road and into a field on the other side of the road towards some woods. I'm getting goosebumps writing this, but I could still see its silhouette speeding across the field in my neighbor's yard as it went into the black of the night. I stopped for a moment, shivering, before speeding up the road to a safe distance. I had no idea what I had just seen, so I called my mom to tell her that I had just witnessed this tall, alien-looking creature less than 100 meters from our home. She and my sister searched online with what I had told them, and came back with an article on the black stickman phenomena, which fit exactly what I had seen on this normal August night in New Brunswick. This experience has really opened my mind to the paranormal, so for that I'm almost thankful. I was looking over my shoulder for a few weeks, afraid to go out at night, and I still feel unnerved when thinking about it. I haven't seen anything like it since, but have had some experiences with spirits growing up in what my whole family agrees is a haunted house. This is the story of the time I saw an apparition that looked as if it crept right off the silver screen. This encounter happened in the late summer, early fall of 2007. I was in the 4th grade and my family had just moved to the absolute boonies of Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi and still had a lot of family down there, but my father had been stationed in another state for the previous several years. Military. So I guess you could say we were moving back home. My parents were in the market to buy a house, but until they found one, we would be staying with my great-aunt and her family. My aunt had a beautiful but slightly run-down 100-and-something-year-old home in the woods on the outskirts of an abominably small town. In order to get to her home, you had to drive down a one-lane dirt road through the woods. On this particular afternoon, my sisters and my cousin, who was about our age, were playing tag in the front yard of my aunt's home. Now, you need to know a little bit about the layout of this yard. The yard was longer than it was wide. Picture a rectangle with the house on one end and the dirt roadway at the other end of it. If you're looking at the house from the road, the right side of the yard is bordered by muddy soil, thick trees, and bamboo that creates a sort of natural border to the property. On the other side of the yard is a length of tropical leafy bushes about waist high that run from the front of the porch almost down to the road separating the yard from the driveway, just on the other side of the plants. Near the road in the middle of the yard was a ginormous old oak tree dripping with Spanish moss. Now back to the game. This particular round of tag, I was it. My siblings and cousin were running around the yard and the house, trying to hide behind various things. As I was scanning the yard, I noticed the figure of a girl with long, straight brown hair, peeping her head out from behind the big oak tree. She was wearing a dress that fell below her knees, which was very different from what the rest of us kids were wearing, namely cut-off jean shorts and stained t-shirts. I thought it was odd to see someone there, since I could have sworn that I saw all of the girls run in the opposite direction toward the house, but I figured I would go and check it out anyway. As I made it to the tree, I looked behind the trunk, and there was no one there. I was beyond confused at this point. My 10-year-old brain didn't immediately jump to ghost. It was more along the lines of, who the heck was that? The tree was in the center of the yard, with no other trees or shrubbery within 20 or so yards, so if the girl would have run up from behind the tree, I should have seen her. By that point, I started scanning the yard, and my eyes happened to fall to those tropical bushes that bordered the driveway. Crouching down near the bushes was the same figure of the girl. I remember her squatting near the leaves and peering in my direction when I noticed that she had no face. She was completely absent of any facial features, eyes, lips, and nose. Her face was just a smooth expanse of flesh-colored skin. It looked like something straight out of Silent Hill. I must have looked away, and then she was gone. I have never seen this apparition since. Now, I honest to goodness recall this encounter just as I have described above, but it was also 14 years ago. It's quite possible that my memory has faltered in some aspects, or is exaggerated in others, but this is how I recall it. Either way, it was terrifying. This happened when I was around 10, in a house where the second floor was still under construction. My mom and grandma had a major disagreement back when we were living in Toronto, and my grandma decided to move to her home country, Ecuador. Soon after, due to complications, my mom decided to give in and follow her. We moved in with my grandma, but since the house was a little small for 4 people, and since my great-grandmother was soon to be moving in as well, my family decided to extend a floor. For the meantime, my great-grandma was staying in a room extension with her own bathroom, because she would have accidents frequently. The room was an extension outside, close to the main door. My great-grandma was really old, but still cognitive enough to have fun conversations with, so I would spend a lot of time talking with her outside. She started telling me about this little green guy that would visit her at night, and he would just sit on the TV and watch her. In South America, we grew up talking about duendes, leprechauns that would mess with people wandering around strange areas at night. It's kind of our folklore, like the chupacabras or skinwalkers. But since my grandma was getting old, my mom would just brush it off and blame it on her aging or her mental health. One night my family went to a dinner party, but since I had a best friend over, I insisted on staying home. It was getting really late, but we were waiting for one of our favorite shows to air on Cartoon Network. My family is very religious and hated these quote-unquote demonic cartoons, so we tried to watch quietly. I was under the impression that my great-grandma was resting in one of the rooms behind us, in my mom's room, because I kept hearing noises coming from down the hall. Suddenly, I hear my grandma's walker clicking its way out of the room, so I quickly turned off the TV and told my friend to be quiet. We hid under the blankets and waited until my grandma went back to the room. She used to walk with one of those four-legged walkers, and would take her time as she moved. We thought she was just going to use the washroom, so we decided to wait it out. Her walking seemed very quiet, though, which was odd, but I didn't think much of it. She went to the washroom, but didn't open up the toilet lid. There was no noise, no peeing or anything, and the weirdest part? No word or call to see if we were sleeping or still up. We just heard the walking go straight back to the room quietly. Then suddenly I remembered that the dinner my family went to was meant to celebrate her. She wasn't home, and we were supposed to be alone. As soon as I realized that, we heard small footsteps sprinting from one room to the other, and then a glass breaking. We were petrified. We didn't know what was behind us, if it was someone that broke in or an animal, but we were too afraid to look. We stayed under the sheets until my family came back home. Fortunately, they arrived only moments after. As soon as my stepdad came in, we told him what happened. He brought my dog upstairs where the second floor was being built, as he was thinking that it would have been an animal that came in since the staircase was only being covered by a plastic sheet. My mom goes into my grandma's room and finds a glass jug on the floor with a broken handle. The jug was supposed to be in my room. Something had to have carried the jug and dropped it in there. My dog was also barking throughout the night, which was pretty common, but when he came in the house, he seemed really anxious to sprint upstairs, as if he knew something was there. My best friend and I have been through a couple of weird things back home, but nothing as vivid as this. Again, it could have been an animal, but that doesn't explain the metal walker noise that we heard. It could have been an intruder, but we would have definitely seen someone come through the plastic covering the stairwell. It could have been the little green guy my great-grandma talked about. A lot of times little shadows would rush through my peripherals, but I always thought it was just my imagination. She passed away only a couple months after this. But weird small footsteps and random dog chases never stopped. The footsteps I would hear didn't sound like small critters, since animals tend to bolt from place to place. The steps I remember hearing as a kid seemed much more meticulous and slow, and always late at night. Before my best friends and I were separated, one passed away, the other moved away. We used to ride around doing all of the haunted legend places within reasonable driving distances. Sometimes we would drive for a few hours, but most of them weren't scary other than the adrenaline-filled, hyped up, "Did you hear or see that?" that would cause us to get spooked. This one was different. Way different. We were just out of high school, probably 20 at the most, and we were looking for an actually scary place to visit. A lot of people we knew that we were into these kinds of things, so we would always get tips on where to go. There was the original 3 of us that day and another friend that wanted to tag along. After a little drive to our destination, about 45 minutes, we stopped at a Wawa to get gas and grab a few snacks. Like I stated earlier, we were all about 20 at the time, so we were all hyped up because we knew that spooky time was getting close. We'd always pick on that other friend that tagged along. Nothing harsh, but just, you're scared. So I believe it was me that said something along those lines that was overheard by a few people. It got the attention of other people in the Wawa, including these two creepy, older guys who seemed like they didn't fit in. Their clothes were all beat up and dirty, and they just didn't seem right for the area, and the time was probably 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. "What's the little one scared of?" asked one of them. I say little because the three of us are all abnormally tall. The shortest between us was 6'4", and he was normal, so probably about 5'9". We replied and explained how we got tipped to go to this road, because it's haunted. They replied that it wasn't scary, and if we wanted a real scare, we should go to this random road. I forget what it was called exactly, but apparently it's this random memorial statue for a plane crash in the middle of the woods, where crazy things are supposed to happen. We grabbed our stuff, didn't think anything of it. As soon as we left, the group started talking and decided to go with the other road that the guys had hyped up. I know. A typical horror movie what not to do. So we get to the entrance of the road, and already it did not disappoint. There were woods on both sides, not one street light in sight, and I remember there was this, detention center off to the right, in the middle of nowhere. So the spooks already began from the moment that we hit the entrance. We decided to drive down the road and search for the statue. We noticed that there were trees cut down on the side of the road and laying parallel to the shoulder of it. We finally find the statue. About 5 minutes go by in silence, and we decided to enhance the scare factor by shutting the lights off. About a minute goes by and we see a shadow figure pop up from the statue. We all freak out as it starts walking toward us, but it was making movements that no human would normally be capable of. It was dark out, but this thing was black. It was darker than the woodsy sky, so we could make out some of it. It was huge. Like I said earlier, we were all extremely large compared to the average guy, but this thing would have dwarfed any of us. We decided to peel out of there and continue down the road, figuring that it would lead us out. Boy, were we wrong. About 3 minutes go by, and we hit a dead end, which in this case was an open spot in the woods with sand everywhere. The cutout was massive, but surrounded by forest. There were different cutouts, and ways to go from there, and I'm pretty sure the road continued after this cutout, but we were pretty deep in the woods by that point. So we decided to turn around and leave, obviously. After we turn around, we stop to just take in the eerie feeling. The other three guys were talking about the shadow figure that we saw earlier, while I happened to catch something out of the corner of my eye. About 40 feet away from me, I see what appears to be a white face, and then another, and another, all surrounding the car. The other guys didn't see them, and I'm rarely ever scared, but seeing me panic, they all knew that something was up. My panic caused them to panic. We then floored it far away from the sand turnaround. We get about half a mile down the road, somewhat near the statue, and pull over to gather our composure before we get out of there. When we stopped, I swear I heard the most typical ghosty, ooh, kind of noise. This was now turning into a movie I wish that I was never part of. We were really scared. After finding the way that we had come, we started heading back out. Remember those trees I talked about earlier? They were now laying in the middle of the road, blocking us in, as we all see the white faces or masks that I had seen earlier. Thank God my one friend, the driver, was good at driving and valued safety over his car. We drove on the edge of the woods and felt like we were defying gravity to speed our way out. The car was literally sideways on the edge of the forest. I mean, I could literally stick a single finger out the window and touch the trees. We all made it home safely that night. After doing research, we found out that that spot was notorious in that area for crazy things happening, such as body dumps and murders. Because of the shadow and the ghost noise that we heard, my head, heart, and gut tells me that that place is actually haunted. As previously stated, that place is famous for dumping bodies, along with the plane crash, so there's bound to be some spirits there. I think where we were that night was actually haunted, but we just happened to be there on a night when there were more things going on. I can't say for certain, but I'm 99% sure that we survived one of their setups that night. I'm 100% sure that I will never go back again. Recently I moved into a new house. Two close friends, let's call them E and R, moved in along with me. When we went to view the house, nothing seemed off about it. However, about a week in, we screwed up. E had been cleaning out the attic and came across a wooden box. It looked fairly new and we didn't think anything could ever go wrong with it. E and I looked inside the box. All that was there was 4 candles, an old matchbox with no matches, and a small wooden doll. E and I set it aside, not interested. We ended up putting it back in the attic, apart from the doll, which R wanted to put in her potted plant. We proceeded with our sorting and forgot all about the box. That night, when I went to bed, I felt as if I were being watched. It was unnerving, but I eventually fell asleep. A few hours later, I heard something bang against the floor above me. I would have brushed it off as E, as his room was up there, if what had happened next didn't take place. For a bit of background knowledge, in September of 2017, R was in a car crash. The others were fine, but R ended up in a wheelchair. R called out for me. It wasn't calm as it usually was, but frantic. I moved into her room, and she asked me if I had heard the crash. I told her I had and thought that it was just E. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that E was working a night shift. It was unlike her to be so flustered, so I offered to stay with her, which she accepted. Soon after, we began to hear light footsteps and giggles outside R's room. We were scared, but continued to try and tune it out. R fell asleep, but I stayed with her, scared shitless by possible ghost children. Eventually, the stupid undead kids stopped running up and down the halls, so I assumed they left. I was then able to fall into a well-deserved slumber. Then, maybe an hour or so later, E got back from work. I know this because he is incapable of entering anywhere quietly. And then he screamed, like a grown man screaming as if he were a little girl. He ran up the stairs into my room and then out of my room because I was with R, and then he ran into R's room. He then told us what had happened. Apparently, he'd been putting his work bag down and felt as if he were being watched. He looked up and for a split second saw a little boy and girl holding hands. Now, normally I wouldn't have believed anything like this, but he's an honest bloke, and I saw the look of terror on his face. I used to live on a large property with a lake, 29 acres of land and heavily forested. I was playing. I was about 11 or 12 at the time, outside by myself, right after the sun had set. I believe this was in the fall, so there were barely any lights to see outside, maybe except for a light on the house about 50 feet away from the swing set that I was on. Behind the swing set were really tall trees. Not many new or sapling trees were anywhere near. I know specifically that there were no trees short enough to have some owl or animal sit in them, because all the trees, pine trees, were mature and taller than my 2-story house. My mom came out to tell me that dinner was almost ready. When she did this, she turned on the outside light on the back porch, illuminating the area so I could see. I was still on the swing set at the time. I start to get up and I turn around, I think to find my flip-flops, when I see 2 bright eyes reflecting the light of the outside light looking at me from about 20 feet away. The eyes were well above any average human size, about 7.5 feet off of the ground, and they were large. I stopped, stunned and really scared. I was familiar with the woods right behind the swing set, and I knew something unnatural was looking at me. I couldn't see the body, but the eyes looked at me and I tried to get an understanding, and I thought of something massive and humanoid. Bigfoot. Remind you that no animal could have levitated on that spot longer than 5 seconds. Even then, there were no perches or anything there to suspect critters. So to end my experience, I ran inside, locked all the doors, and couldn't think straight for the next couple of days. Let's just say I never played outside on that swing set after sunset ever again. I still think about this, and it chills me. On May 9th of this year, I went to a flea market to browse. I passed by a clear cabinet that held an assortment of old antique dolls, and I was particularly drawn to an old, cracked doll wearing a hat with feathers. As I examined her closer, I noticed that she had a cloth body, but her arms, head, and legs were made of the same type of plastic, or possibly porcelain. I felt very drawn to her and was surprised by her price, only $35. She wasn't in very good condition, and was clearly ancient, based on the cracks on her body and the way that her face is painted on. I returned to the cashier with the doll, and immediately the workers who had been deep in conversation halted and fell quiet. They proceeded to tell me a little more about the doll, who supposedly hexes anyone who inconveniences her. This only made me feel more inclined to purchase her, as someone who is very interested in the paranormal, and as it is part of my faith, Wicca. So I ended up buying her. My younger sister, 11, wasn't very happy that I had bought the doll, whose name was Madame Leonora. She felt very thrown off by the doll's presence and requested that the doll be placed in the trunk on the ride home. I didn't want to upset the doll in case I got hexed, but my parents insisted that I put the doll in the trunk. So I did. That same day, I almost went to the hospital after an accident at my home. Similar disturbing events happened around the home whenever someone insulted Madame or did something she didn't like. These events pose a possible trauma trigger for some people, so I won't specify what the events were here. Just know that they were serious, and they were awful. I began giving Madame gifts and saying good morning and good night to her every day. On the first day that I gave her a gift, a package that I hadn't been expecting for another 2 weeks came in the mail. Every time I give her a gift, she gives me good luck. Madame and I had formed a friendship, but towards late June I began having strange, very specific dreams. In these dreams, Madame would climb down off of the shelf where she lives and escort me outside. We'd light candles and perform a ritual, and then I would bury Madame in a box with the gifts that I had given her over the months. As soon as the dream ends, I wake up. So, with the knowledge that I have because of my Wiccan faith, I decided to hold a seance of sorts in order to communicate with the spirit hosting my doll. I lit a candle and used a pendulum with a board to communicate. The candle flame responded to everything I said, and I have never seen such clear responses through my pendulum before. Based on what I got out of the session, Madame was able to tell me that she would like to be buried, but won't reveal to me why. I've never sensed any negative energy around Madame before, but with each passing day, the air in my room feels heavier, if that makes any sense. I'd like to fulfill her wish and bury her because I think she may be a Victorian mourning doll, but the vendors who sold her have no information on her at all, only that she makes bad things happen. If she is indeed a Victorian mourning doll, it would make sense why she wants to be buried. The only problem is that she refuses to tell me why I have to bury her. If anyone can tell me if there's any danger to burying her, if there's anything I should know about this, or what I can do to identify what time period she's from, I'd really appreciate the help. I was born a twin, but my twin sister died at birth. So did all 6 children my parents had after me. Those died pretty early into the pregnancy, so it was mostly miscarriages. My twin was the only one who took a few breaths before passing. I'm the only one who survived and grew up to be the adult I am today. I only lived in one house during my entire lifetime, until recently when I got to finally move out. There's good reason for that. I learned about my siblings, especially my twin sister, when I was 14 years old. But when I was a first grader, I would wholeheartedly believe that I wasn't an only child, and tell my teachers and the other children about my sister who I was playing with and sharing a room with. By the way, I don't have actual memories of this because no one was there. But I didn't lie for attention. I genuinely believed that. I had a fair share of trauma and mental illnesses in my life already, so when I started to hallucinate disfigured shadows and children in my house at age 12, I went to see a therapist, and it was deemed a symptom of my PTSD. The shadows would form a kind of uncanny young girl's shape most of the time. Until recently, I just discovered these hallucinations were side effects of my admittedly fragile mental state, since the encounters really scared me. Sometimes it even felt like it would talk to me in a weird, unfriendly way. They stopped at the age of 14, when my mother finally told me about my siblings. But still on the staircase to my room and around the dinner table where those things appeared, I would feel watched or even chased, especially at night. Sometimes when I'm awake late, I hear footsteps up the stairs to my room, but they just stop in front of the last step and don't go back down, but seem to start from the bottom again a few minutes later. This changed when I got together with my boyfriend. He started sleeping over and spending more time at the house naturally, and I never told him about my scary encounters. So when we were still up at night and the footsteps occurred, which I had learned to ignore quite well, he looked up from his phone screen, clearly alerted, and my stomach dropped. He's a skeptic, so after he mentioned how the sounds were weird, he quickly got his mind off of it. A few weeks later, my boyfriend went to the bathroom at night. In the morning, he told me how weird he felt walking up the stairs. He felt like someone was watching or chasing him. I never told him about how I always felt this exact thing when I walk up those stairs. Those occurrences with him started piling up, until I got genuinely terrified of staying longer than necessary in that godforsaken house. Right after I turned 18 earlier this year, I started working my hardest to afford to move out. And I finally did it last week. So far, I haven't had scary encounters in my new home. Something is telling me that it was her the whole time. Since I was a child, she's been tormenting me. The way my skeptic boyfriend experienced it, the same exact way, without knowing, convinced me. I am not crazy. This is an encounter I experienced in the summer of 2009. I was born and raised in the plains of Texas, specifically in an area where black-eyed kids sightings are prevalent. I had heard the stories, tales, legends, whatever you want to call them, since I was a young man, but never truly believed them. The black-eyed kids were mainly something I entertained as a joke, or something to get a rise out of people. This changed in the summer of 2009. It was a warm night in June. I was up late, around 2 a.m., as I typically like to stay up late, especially in the summer since it would be fairly warm even after the sun went down. I had just run up to the store to grab a big fountain drink and was returning into my house through the back door when I was approached by two kids, a boy and a girl. I was very startled once I realized that they were there, since I wasn't expecting to encounter anyone in my backyard so late at night. The little boy asked, "Could we come in? We need to use the phone, we're lost." This is when I noticed the blackness of their eyes. Both of them so dark, they were like pits. This is also when my heart sank. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing them, that they were there, right in front of me. As I mentioned before, I had heard the legends of the black-eyed children most of my life, so there was no way I was going to let them in my house. I darted inside and locked the back door as quickly as I could. Once I was in, I ran upstairs and flipped on the lights to try and see if they were still outside. Thankfully, by then, they were gone. I had so much adrenaline pumping by that point, though, that I grabbed a weapon and began searching the house and making sure all doors and windows were locked. It took me hours to get to sleep that night, and it's an encounter that will stay with me for the rest of my life. These entities took the form of something most people view as innocent, weak, mild, and try to trick unsuspecting people and do God knows what with or to them. I'm just glad my reflexes kicked in and I was able to live to tell the tale. Most of this stuff happened to me between the ages of 10 and 18. I've posted before about my haunted school, and I'd like to share more of what I've heard. Whatever these things are, they have really enjoyed screwing with me periodically. I was 17 and had just gotten home from some event, either with a church group or some friends, I don't recall. It was about 11 p.m., and as mandated, I woke my parents up to let them know that I was home and alive. Don't remember why I felt the need to shower that night, but I did. The shower was a stall with a glass door and really high-pressure steam, which was almost deafening in that plastic stall. You would have to shout at me right next to the bathroom door in order for me to hear you, so that's why what happened next was so shocking. Mid-shower, there was this loud, blood-curdling female scream that I could hear from inside the shower. I had never heard someone scream like that in real life, and it paralyzed me for a second. I have two sisters, and so I immediately thought the worst. I busted out of the shower, ran to my parents' room dripping wet, wearing only a towel, fully expecting my parents to be getting up to see who was screaming. The house wasn't that big, just a double-wide trailer with an addition. I was shocked to find them in bed asleep still. Their door was open. If I heard the scream, then they should have really heard it, especially since neither of them are heavy sleepers. I woke them quickly and asked if they had heard that scream, which they didn't. Mom was concerned, and Dad hopped out of bed and we checked on my siblings. All sound asleep. So then we searched the house and even looked outside. Nothing. He usually gets annoyed and upset when I talk about the paranormal. He had to exorcise some evil spirit from a room when he was on his mission at age 20, so he prefers to have them just not exist at our house at all. And no scary movies. But this time he was pretty calm, probably because he could tell how upset that I was. I wasn't dreaming, hallucinating, or making it up, and he knew it. I was standing naked with a towel, nearly hyperventilating and still dripping from the shower. Dad tried to comfort me, telling me it was probably just a cat outside. Yeah, really. He didn't believe it, but that's what he was selling, so I better buy it. I really had nothing else to do but go to bed, down in the basement where most of the activity occurred, but you bet your butt I didn't sleep much. Whatever it was that was screaming would bug me periodically. I was the only one in the basement, so naturally, I was the only witness. I have lots of stories that my family still won't believe. So I had to shut it off so that I could live a normal life again without seeing them. But my cousin, who has no abilities, has seen them in the house. At first, when he moved in, he didn't know that it was haunted. I didn't want to tell him that the house was haunted because I thought, well, maybe it's not. And if I told him, he would believe it was, and that would influence him in some way. If it was haunted, I was going to let him find out on his own, or if it didn't bother him, then I would let it be. As the weeks passed and things moved in front of our eyes, he started to hear his family members' voices calling his name from time to time in the middle of the night. It was the same experience that I had had. He would have a nightmare sometimes of something trying to come inside of the room, yet it was stuck on the other side of the door, unable to get in. It was beckoning him to let it inside, to open the door. It's odd because I actually have a video of it doing that, and it's heard in the video faintly. When I lived alone, it would occur very frequently, but instead of in dreams, it was literally in real life and happening on camera. I did not show him the video beforehand, so there's no way he could have known. Eventually, I did open up to him about it being haunted, but that it's not really a big deal or anything, since my family ends up in the haunted house usually, for some odd reason. I explained that if we made excuses and such, that the activity would remain low. For instance, if something slides across the floor in front of us, we just pass it off as something else, no matter how stupid that excuse or rationalization is, and we say it out loud, shrug it off, and move on. Sometimes if it happens again after that, we just make another excuse, and then it stops. If something pounds on our walls from all directions, which only usually happens for a few seconds, we just ignore it, and make another excuse, and then life goes on as normal. My cousin would be laying in bed at night, and he explained that he would see this almost rippling kind of apparition. I thought it must be an eyesight issue, so I asked him to show me where it was. Weirdly enough, it was the same wall that I had had a nightmare about months ago involving things trying to climb out of a black tar-like door with nearly 100 arms covered in the tar-like goo. So yeah, it was weird, and he didn't have that experience again. Anyway, in the room one day when I was living there on my own, I had seen a woman, pretty much the generic, typical ghost. Most of them don't seem to look like that in real life, but in movies they do. Just a young woman who floated through my bedroom door and then through the wall beside it. Nearly entirely see-through, and from the waist down, she looked as if she were made of mist or fog. no color at all, and also in a very old, almost wedding gown type of dress. Also in the room, I would often see glowing white, circular orb-like things that would float and then leave. Almost like a flicker, but I thought it was just, I don't know, a headache or whatever. But it was always in one spot of the room. Well, my cousin saw it too, again in the exact same spot that I would usually see it in. And then I told him that it happens sometimes. He's gotten used to the house, and most of the activity stopped happening after I shut it off. I also bought a little spirit box and would use it outside whenever the activity would go up. Soon after I went back inside, life was back to normal and the activity would subside for another month or two. Before the spirit box, the activity was nearly unlivable, dangerous almost. Now it's extremely silent, like we have an actual home now. If anything, it's just a house that happens to be haunted, but a house nonetheless. With all of the haunted houses my family and I have lived in, my only advice is to never let a haunting consume you. I work for a nonprofit that helps mentally and physically disabled people live fulfilling lives. J and C are brothers. I work for the same company as C, but at a different house. There are several houses around the city and bordering area. He works at the houses that only house children, 4 of them, I believe. His story begins on a graveyard shift, which he was working with one coworker, a middle-aged woman. The house has alarms on the doors and windows which are alarmed during the night to let them know if any kids try to leave when they shouldn't. C was downstairs in the office. His coworker was upstairs cleaning. Suddenly the alarms in the house went off, every door and window. He sprang up, assuming that the clients were planning some mass breakout, as he would later refer to it. He yelled up to his coworker to head out one door. He went out the other, frantically looking for whoever was outside. He saw one client standing beneath a tree, but apparently not in any hurry. He thought he recognized the client to be someone we'll call B. He said, "B, head back inside," or something to that effect. He continued searching for the other clients, but after running around in a panic, found no one. He gave up and headed inside to reconvene with his coworker. He said he found B, but no one else. She stunned him when she revealed that everyone was inside, never having left, including B. He said she must be mistaken. He was just outside beneath a big tree in the backyard. She had fear on her face when he insisted this. She explained how what he saw was in fact what staff of that house referred to as white dress. A ghostly woman wearing all white that seems to reside on the property and is often seen under that tree. Needless to say, he was surprised and confused, and definitely creeped out, but the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, a client from another home whom C was very close to sadly died. He was sick for a while, and C was present for his final breaths in the hospital. He was wheelchair-bound when he was alive, and later a client at the white dress home needed a wheelchair temporarily while recovering from a slip and fall accident. They brought the wheelchair that used to belong to K. Right away, B began fixating on it. When it was no longer in use, B would take it for his own enjoyment. Staff took note of this, and couldn't explain why he loved it so much. He would take it outside to a small hill, push it down the hill empty, and then return it to the top and do it again, over and over. B is nonverbal, in that he can't speak with spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates using gestures. One useful gesture has him select staff's right or left hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, I could hold out my hand and say, "B, do you want tacos for dinner?" Identify it as my left hand option. Or do you want burgers for dinner? Right hand. And then he would choose. He also had a tic, where he would hold his palm up to his face very close and sort of mumble into it. This is actually what C thought he saw when White Dress was under the tree. He thought B was there, and that he was doing that. This is important because B would often do this gesture when he played with the wheelchair. Staff got curious and thought that they might be able to determine who B was talking to and playing with in the wheelchair. They posed a sequence of this or that questions with fake names. B, who's in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily? No response. Is it James or Samuel? No response. Is it Stephanie or Teresa? Again, no response. They did this a few times before inserting the real name. Is it Kay or Jen? Right away, he selected the correct hand. Everyone present was shocked. According to C, he was the only real link between Kay and this house. B and Kay didn't know each other, and he didn't believe anyone talked of the previous owner of the wheelchair, so he can't explain how B seemingly knew Kay's name. This story still doesn't end there, however. For reasons unknown to me, C took the wheelchair home for a while. Maybe it was a keepsake. Regardless, he brought it home with him and weird things started happening around his house. C and J, like I said, are brothers. They live in a big house and rent it out with their girlfriends as well as 2 others. One day, everyone was out except for J as well as C's girlfriend. Both of them claimed that the door to C's room slammed much too loudly and hard to be explained by wind, especially since no windows in his bedroom were open. This happened a few times while the wheelchair was there, which is made more interesting when you know that Kay would often get C's attention by slamming doors. Jay said other strange things had happened once the wheelchair arrived too, but I'm not sure what they were and don't want to confabulate the details. I do know that he claimed to once hear someone calling out his name, but no one was home except him. As I said in the opening of this post, both J and C were and still remain skeptics. They agreed that these events are all strange, but ultimately they aren't convinced. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would love for any sort of paranormal subjects in the world to be verified, but I guess I just need to see it myself to believe it. I posted this in a UFO subreddit, as I was not sure what a crawler was until after doing a bit of research. There's a possibility that what I saw that night may have been a crawler as much as it could have been an alien. I never saw a UFO, but I saw an entity mostly associated with UFOs. I grew up in the USSR, in now northern Belarus, until I was 13 years old. 37 years ago, my mother and I saw an entity outside looking in at us through the window. It was hairless, pale white, huge, bulging black eyes, and it had teeth that were very small, very well spaced, skinny, and pointed, almost like an anglerfish. We hid for hours, until we heard my father return home. We both looked out to see the being stand up from behind a wall. It was much taller than a human. It was hiding back there behind that wall, and I believe that it was waiting for us to come outside. My father drove up the driveway, and we saw the silhouette of its body from the back. It was hunched over, staring at the car. My father saw it in the headlights, and what it looked like, perfectly. He drove at it, and it ran away into the brush around the house. It never made a sound. It seemed smart but cautious, and the overwhelming feeling that I got that night was that it was vicious and violent. My parents spoke with the police, as we were so horrified about the encounter. After speaking to the police or the KGB, we were relocated and forced to never speak of the event to anyone. Within 30 hours, I was living in a new home nearly 100 kilometers away. I have searched for so many years for an explanation. I've spoken to government officials in Belarus. I have had interviews with people who lived near our home then, about 10 years ago. I have no answers. So I always struggled with sleep paralysis. But one time, maybe 3 years ago, I woke up from my sleep, but I wasn't able to move at all. I saw a very slim, abnormally tall, black figure in the corner of my room. I looked at him. He was looking at me, his face down. When I looked at him, he just calmly walked away from my room, and I woke up. To this day, I still think about it. And I found out thousands of people all around the world see the exact same thing. I can't believe it's all psychological. How can everyone see the same thing? From China to Ireland, USA to Turkey? It doesn't make sense. I think that we all may have witnessed something otherworldly. This is one of the unexplained series of events and the existence of the unknown in my very intimate environment. Location. My grandma's apartment is in one of the populous areas of Yangon's downtown, which is a 30-year-old apartment that has no record of criminal activity or any violent events whatsoever. The place? There's a room in this apartment that is always gloomy and subsequently felt ominous whenever a living soul would pass around it or in it. It's a typical, normal bedroom. Queen-sized bed, modern furniture, and a picture of Jesus Christ in it. Even though there's nothing abnormal about the room itself, the aura that it gave out is evil. It used to be my late grandpa's room, in which he was suffering from hepatitis C. The problem. The room itself is locked now and no one lives in it, since it used to cause the house members and guests chills whenever a person or just someone would pass around the room unexpectedly. Whenever you look inside it, there's no one. Sometimes a 3-second long snickering laugh in a low tone can be heard. This can happen at any time of the day. Sometimes there's nothing at all. But whenever a person tries to lay on the bed of that room, everyone who's done it has said that they felt someone is watching them with an evil smile. But it's just their feeling, including mine. Another common denominator is that we cannot identify how that evil looks or where it came from. We all know that something is just there. What all of the house members and guests agree on is that something is watching the bed, as previously stated, with an evil smile. The aftermath. Even though no one goes near there and the room is locked since my grandpa's death, we are all worried due to the frequent sounds and laughter that we can hear at any random time. My aunt, who lives with my grandma at the same apartment, said that clapping can also be heard at a certain time of night, but not regularly. But it can't be anything from upstairs coming down, because upstairs is an empty hall that's been cleaned and locked by the previous owners until they find another renter. These events are strange since they didn't happen right away after my grandparents moved in. It started happening like a decade after they've been living there. The rest is history. I hope you all can tell me what it is. All the family members are questioning to this day. For years, I've dealt with the disappearing object phenomenon, but lately, items have started appearing or reappearing as well. Just this morning, for example, I woke up and went into my kitchen to make coffee, and a random pack of paper coffee cups was sitting in the middle of my kitchen counter. No one else lives here or has access to my house, and I always set an alarm at night, so I would hear it if someone had tried to get in. I literally have no clue where this pack of coffee cups came from. It just appeared out of thin air. I'm grateful in a way, because it sure was convenient to have the cups this morning, but still, who put them there? I even checked my Amazon history to see if somehow I bought these without remembering, but no such purchase was there. I've had other objects randomly appear in my bathroom too. Lip glosses that aren't in a color that I would normally buy. I've had strange food items that I didn't buy appear in my pantry too. Boxed soups, ketchup, I don't even like it. Mustard, don't use it that much. And a random bottle of soy sauce. I don't even know what to think about this. My parents live on about 30 acres of wooded land in the middle of nowhere. I was in high school at this time and was up late on a weekend. I remember that I had fallen asleep in the recliner in our living room and woke up at around 2 a.m. I sat up and watched TV for about half an hour and then got up to get some water before going to bed. Our kitchen sink looked out over our backyard, and I could see clear to the tree line because of a lamp on a telephone pole that we had installed for security. As I looked out, I saw something dash across the tree line for about 50 feet before going back into the trees. I can still see it in my mind. It was either a white or really pale gray, and looked like a person moving on all fours. There was no visible fur or clothing. I could tell it was large, at least the size of a person, maybe larger. It covered the 50-foot span in between 5 and 10 seconds. I was absolutely frozen in place for a solid minute after this encounter. My parents kept telling me that it was just an albino coyote. I know it wasn't. A few years later, I came across a YouTube video talking about really strange creatures caught on trail cameras. It was one of those low-quality edits that pop up on your recommended videos after a long video binge. Halfway through came an image that made my blood go cold. It was called a rake. This was exactly what I had seen. To this day, I will swear by it that I saw this creature, and still refuse to be outside at night at my parents' house. When I was a kid, younger than 12, my mom took me to visit her old friends at their apartment. It was decorated in an odd fashion. Tapestries hung all over the place with old antique furniture and knickknacks lining the walls. We didn't visit there long at all. On our way out the door, my mom pointed out a statue that they had in their living room. It had a beard, eyes that looked straight ahead, and a walking stick that connected to the base of the statue. It was about half my height, hand-carved solid dark wood, and was sort of tribal-looking. I remember thinking, I really hope they don't offer to let her have that thing. It's scary. And, of course, they gave it to her. I felt uncomfortable sharing the car ride back home with the statue. My mom was raving about how cool it was all the way there. I couldn't have been less happy. After we made it back, she placed it down next to the fridge in the kitchen, right outside the entryway. That sucked because our kitchen was the center of our house. Anywhere you wanted to go, you usually had to walk through the kitchen. So I told my mom how much I hated the statue, and how I really hated the idea of it being there in particular. My mom told me that I was just being silly, so there it stayed. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the statue being on the other end of the house, and it terrified me. It made me feel unsafe. I don't know what I found to be so threatening about it, but the next day my grandmother agreed with my feelings. She told my mom that the statue made her very uneasy, and that it had a negative energy. My mom told her that she was overreacting, and that she wasn't getting rid of the statue. I felt constant anxiety. I would often refuse to leave my bedroom in the morning after having violent nightmares involving the statue. It was always something along the lines of the statue becoming animate and stabbing me to death with its walking stick. When I walked through the kitchen, I would literally push my back against the wall and edge around the room to avoid getting near the damn thing. In time, even my mom's friends agreed that it kinda weirded them out too. I hated it, and despite how much it scared people, my mom still wouldn't get rid of it. Though she did finally agree to move it to the living room in a more secluded space. One night I was sitting in the dining room doing my homework, and my mom was in the living room with her friend. I heard whispering that was akin to what you'd hear in a horror movie. Cryptic, overlapping, incoherent whispers. I immediately knew that the voices didn't belong to my mom or her friend, so I went into the living room to ask them if they had heard anything, and before I could speak, the look on their faces told me everything. My mom told me to come closer to her and said, "We heard them too." We all agreed that the sound was unmistakably close to us, and it was clear as day. The source of the sound had come from, you guessed it, around the same spot that the statue had been moved to. We all just sort of stared at the statue for a minute blankly, and I don't remember what else was said after that. But still, my mom refused to get rid of the statue. The nightmares continued. My anxiety grew worse and worse. Bad things constantly happened in the house. My mom got pregnant sometime around then, and had to be hospitalized, so I went to live with my grandma for a bit. I told her all about how my mom never got rid of the statue, and how I had never felt safe since it arrived. I told her about the nights that I felt someone looming over me, and the times when I locked myself in the bathroom because I heard noise coming from it. After my mom delivered my baby brother, I moved back home. My grandma explained to me that she had burnt the statue long ago, and didn't care how my mom felt about it because I didn't deserve to live in fear over a stupid piece of wood. Once the statue was long gone, my mom finally stopped being stubborn and agreed that strange things had occurred. I was finally able to walk through my house again without tiptoeing around it, but sometimes I still felt off about the house after that. Last night, I woke up from a vision where my boyfriend bit me right between the shoulder blades. I turned to look at him, but he was deep asleep. The next morning, he told me that he saw a dream where I bit him between his shoulder blades. We were weirded out by this. There was no bite mark on his back, but it hurt like a bitch, by his words. The day starts going by and I notice him acting strangely. I've been working mostly with spirits before, and we live in a very old building with an interesting history, but this was new. He said he can't control his own body, that there is someone else with him. I started to get my stuff to banish whatever there was. I kept talking to him while gathering my things. He wasn't acting like himself anymore. He was very rude, but in a charming way while eating grapes on our bed. I banished the thing, still unsure of what it was. The rest of the day has been normal, and I haven't felt any bad energies. But my boyfriend keeps telling me that the bite between his shoulder blades keeps hurting. Does anyone have any idea what I am dealing with here? Before the pandemic, I was visiting West Canada, just exploring caves, when I'm pretty deep inside of one, perhaps 70 meters in. I get to this pretty tall section of cavern, and then I hear it. A scuffling noise. I put it off, thinking that it was just some rocks moving. I turn off my headlamp, and then I see them. These two glowing eyes. Glowing yellow eyes. So I turned my lamp on again, and what I saw this time was terrible. There was this grayish thing. It looked humanoid, but its arms and legs were too long and splayed out weirdly. Its claws were long, and they looked like they could easily slice through Kevlar. Its teeth were long as well. Its skin was super tight around its ribs and spine. I could see its bones. It screeched a horrible noise. I had to cover my ears. I look back, and it's gone. But I hear this low growl. Well, I felt it more than I heard it. So I start slowly heading back, and it starts moving toward me. So I start running. Pretty close to the exit, I could see the sunset. I felt its breath on me. As soon as I reached the exit, though, it pulled back. Bystanders said they saw it too, that it ran away like lightning. I'm never going to those caves again. I've always felt that someone was watching me, always with me, just watching, but nobody was to be seen. It was one night during a November break after my birthday, around 2:30, when I started to feel sick, so I got up to use the bathroom. My room was in the basement right next to my parents'. I left my room, and we have this hallway. I walked down, and it was pitch black. I was going up to the door that leads to the stairs, and for a quick second, there was just a girl standing there, and then she just floated up and disappeared. I was so scared, but I really had to use the bathroom, and we only have one that was upstairs, so I continued my journey and used the bathroom. It took me about 20 minutes to get my head together, and then I went back downstairs to bed. Since I moved into this house, 3 a.m. has always been scary to me because I hear a lot of things, and my parents just think that I'm crazy. But the clock hit 3 a.m. I was already scared for my life, and I said, I'm just going to try to go to bed. I tried for about 10 minutes, and it felt like I was being watched still, so I said, hello, is anybody there? No one answered. But a moment later, my painting fell off the wall and hit the shelf that was holding my mirror, to fall and shatter. I've always had a spooky feeling about that mirror, and I was crying in fear. After I calmed down, around 3:50, I was going to bed again, and I felt a tug on my foot, but just pushed it away. After the third time, I sat up and saw the same girl from earlier. Her bright green eyes glowed, but her long, blue, scruffy dress was beautiful. It was scary, but I felt like I've seen her somewhere, or she looked really familiar to me and looked like a younger version of me. Ever since then, I haven't heard a word or peep out of anything, but I still feel her presence. This was probably the scariest thing to happen to me in real life. It took place a couple months ago while I was sightseeing the West Coast. I was visiting a small, quiet beach town in Oregon called Newport. It's basically situated on a cliff, and then down below is the beach. The beach itself is basically empty, and it is huge. It goes on for endless miles and seems like something out of a movie. I've never seen something so vast in my whole life. Anyway, I had spent most of the entire day on the beach, and when it got dark, I climbed back up the cliff to where my car was. I had originally planned to sleep on the beach in a tent, but it was starting to rain, so I figured I would just sleep in my car. I had been traveling all over Oregon and California for the last month, seeing national parks and stuff, and sleeping in my car most nights anyway. And this was literally the perfect, quiet little beach town, so I figured no big deal. I got to my car, which was parked in this public lot for beachgoers at the top of the cliff. But next to my car was the sign that said no overnight parking that I hadn't seen before, so I figured, dang, I guess I'll just go to another spot close by. So I looked on the maps on my phone and saw that 10 minutes away on the outside of town was a nature preserve. As I mentioned earlier, I had been staying at national parks and stuff, so I figured that it would be a nice place to sleep. The weather was beginning to get significantly worse, and I figured I should hurry. I drove there pretty fast, and by the time I did get there, it was completely dark and storming. I entered the nature preserve, which was a single road that followed the cliff line on the coast for a couple minutes with nothing but trees on one side and beach on the other. No cars, no houses, no buildings, no people for what seems like forever. As I drove down the road a little ways, I began to feel uneasy. It all seemed a little creepy, and I felt really alone, but the moon was shining bright through the clouds and the beach was visible, so I figured I was all right. I found a great peak spot on the cliff overlooking the beach and decided to back my car up on it and rest. I opened up the back of my Jeep and climbed in and went to sleep. After a few hours, I woke up. I wasn't sure what had caused me to wake up, but there I was, awake. By this time, the storm had turned into a full-blown monsoon. I could barely see out my windows. The rain was so thick, but I could hear the waves of the ocean down below crashing against the beach, and the wind was blowing so loud that my car was shaking. I noticed water was pouring in through the cracks of my Jeep, and I tried to reach for my phone so I could turn the light on, but I realized I left it in the front, which was blocked by all my luggage, and the only way to get there was to open up the back and step outside. I was about to open the latch and let myself out, and that was when I heard it. Laughter. It sounded like a child at first, playing, but soon I realized it had to be someone older. They had to be close to the car, too, because it was raining so hard there's no way I could hear it if it was far away. I figured it might be a cop telling me to move, but then again, it had to be like 3 or 4 in the morning, and why would they be all the way out here in this weather anyway? I froze to listen, and then I could tell that it was getting closer. I obviously wanted to look up to see, but the way my Jeep was parked was backing up to the end of the cliff facing the beach, and my luggage was literally stuffed all the way through the rest of the vehicle, blocking all side and front windows. I was crammed in the way back, so at the time I was literally trapped and could only see out the back window. It was at that moment that I realized how helpless I was. Her voice grew louder and louder. I could tell now that it was in no way a cop. She was laughing hysterically, the top of her lungs, screaming, "Ah ha 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 ha!" By the steady increasing of volume, I could tell she was definitely coming up to my car, and then between laughs, I heard her creepy voice say, "Oh, well, what are you doing all the way out here?" My heart dropped. Her voice sounded exactly like Bellatrix Lestrange from Harry Potter, and I immediately thought to myself, oh my god, I am going to die. I sat there, frozen solid. I didn't want to move. I remember thinking to myself, this is not happening, this is not happening, this is not happening. But it was. With the storm raging outside my car, my phone being nowhere in reach, me being trapped in the back of the Jeep with no easy exit, on the edge of a cliff in the middle of nowhere, with maniacal, laughing women getting closer and closer, I was literally living in a full-blown horror film. The only thing I could do was wait. I sat there for a few more moments, and then, that's when I saw her. I had poked my head up just a bit to see out the tiny space of visible window that looked to the side of my vehicle. About 10 feet or so from the Jeep, I could see through the thick rain and heavy fog a woman standing there facing not me, thank God, but the edge of the cliff toward the beach. Her arms were flaying up and down rapidly like a bird, and her head was twitching increasingly fast, all over in irregular patterns. Her clothes were ripped, and her voice was broken, and she literally looked like the zombies on The Walking Dead. I couldn't move. Literally all the fears built up in my head of what the source of this hysterical laughter may be came true in that second. I tried rationalizing the situation to myself like, she's on drugs, she's lost her mind, or this is someone joking, or literally anything. But every time I tried, I would peek back up and see that this is something inexplicable. It made no sense. How the hell would someone be out here in what I'm pretty sure was a Category 5 monsoon, 5 miles away from anything, no car, freezing temperature, standing up, screaming in the dead of night? I just couldn't believe it. She kept laughing hysterically, shaking her body all over as if she were fully possessed. I couldn't understand what words she was shouting in between laughs, but it sounded demonic. I was mortified. By the grace of God, I ended up finding a significantly large hunting knife stowed away in the bag next to me in the back of the Jeep, and after taking one last good look at this bewildered, wild devil witch woman, I decided it was time to say a prayer and try my best to sleep. I honestly don't know how I managed to do that, because if I remember right, she probably stayed there for another 30 minutes, howling at the moon. But somehow I did. And the next morning when I woke up, I slowly stepped out of my Jeep, knife in hand, of course, and I looked around. And there was nobody there. It was as if it had never happened. The sun was shining now, and the beach was calm. It was just me, and me alone. One early summer morning in 2000, I got up and ready to drive my mom to her job at a local retirement home. It was dark starting out, but the sun was gradually coming up. I dropped her off and started returning to her house. Halfway back, driving on a country road densely populated with trees and houses, I noticed a car coming because I could see its high-beaming lights from a short distance. I also saw a large, jet-black dog in my path, standing completely still with its head pointed forward. It had a slender build. Having only a few seconds to think, I decided to continue forward and brace for the impact from running into its body. I closed my eyes as I got the closest to it, and continued to drive without swerving, and to my surprise, I felt nothing. I slowed down to check for the dog, but there was absolutely nothing back there. As I continued my drive, I felt strange because there was no way that I would have missed that animal. It was not facing me. It was facing right. I would have struck it broadside. Anyway, I'm thankful I didn't swerve. I feel like had I swerved, things would have been very much different for me today. I do believe that I could have died. I bought 3 small clown statues several years ago from a thrift store. They came in a box of about 100 other handmade clowns, and I picked out the cutest ones. Last year I moved into a new house and put the 3 clowns in a large display case in my living room along with the other trinkets. The case is completely inaccessible to the elements and is sealed by 2 panes of sliding glass. I got a horrible wave of fear one night a few months ago, and for no apparent reason my first instinct was to check the display case. To my shock, I noticed that one of the clowns had turned 180 degrees around in the case and had positioned itself to look away from the living room. The glass had remained shut, and nothing else was out of the ordinary. I turned it back to face the right way and forgot about it until I felt the same wave of fear about a month later. Once again I checked the case, and the same clown was turned the same 180 degrees around again. This has happened about 5 times now, and I'm starting to get really worried. I can't help but believe that it's a dark spirit or energy. I'm so freaked out. It's like the clown is trying to reach me, make me notice it, or perhaps get closer to the other objects in the case. I'm afraid to destroy it, move it, or touch it at all, because I don't want to absorb any energy or curse that it might contain. I was 14 at the time this happened. I had just moved downstairs because I wanted more privacy, as my parents were always checking in on me. I've always been a rebellious kid and wanted to be alone and do my own thing, without anyone telling me not to. I had always noticed strange things happening around my house, and I kept asking my parents if they were going through my stuff in my room. They would always say no, so I always brushed it off. These things still happen to me to this day, like things being moved and waking up in a cold sweat, with no explanation. One night I was on my phone and I felt this feeling of dread and anxiety come over me. I then heard a voice say, "It's okay," and I looked up and a black silhouette of a woman was standing at the foot of my bed. She had no face, but I could clearly see the outline of a petite woman just standing there. I remember feeling very scared, but also very calm at the same time. I was looking at her for 15 seconds before she vanished. I told my parents what had happened, and they were also scared because my dad would always say that he felt a presence in the house. I instantly moved back up to the main floor. I remember telling people about it, and I would always remind them that my parents built the house, so there were no previous owners. People have given the idea that it was my grandma who passed away a year before this happened. I still question if this is true. I've not had anything that intense happen to me again. I still have the nightmares, and also question what she meant. Why was it okay? I remember telling that to myself over and over. I'm thinking of moving back down soon, but for now, I think I'm good. About a year or 2 ago, I was in my room sleeping. I was on my side facing the wall, with the closet in it. I don't even remember waking up. I was just all of a sudden propped up on one arm, still on my side, staring at the closet. I couldn't move either during this event. So as I was stuck staring at the closet door began to open. and I heard whispering coming out from within. I couldn't make out whatever was being said, but when the door was open almost fully, I saw a light grayish, off-white humanoid figure standing in the doorway. I still couldn't move, and then just like that, the figure was gone. The closet door shut, and I was wide awake, laying on my side without any memory of lying back down. It's important, I think, to note that I never felt any fear during this event. I didn't have any kind of emotional response at all. I was just watching what was happening. Any explanations for what it could be, paranormal or not, is appreciated. Also, I've never experienced any kind of sleep paralysis before this or after, and this has never happened again. One night when I was about 16, I walked outside onto my front porch after an argument with my mom and her husband. After about an hour of pacing and talking myself out of just leaving, the sun was setting, so I turned back and started heading back toward the house. When down the hill, about 150 yards, I see something slowly walking out of the tree line that looks to be a young woman in a dress, but the setting sun is shining off of whatever she's wearing. I don't think it's normal, and I'm a little freaked out, so I run inside and grab my binoculars. I come back, and she's only moved a few feet, walking very slowly, long steps. I focus in, and she's glowing. Gold. And she's dressed like a nun. Again, she was glowing gold. I've never seen her since, and I've spent the last 12 years searching for answers of what I witnessed that day. If you live in North Carolina, then you've heard of Gravity Hill. You can look it up to get information about it. One night it was me, my boyfriend, and 3 of his cousins, and we thought it would be fun to drive out to Gravity Hill and test it for ourselves. Something did, in fact, push us up the hill. Cody's car was in neutral, but something did push us up. And as we got to the top, Cody asks us if we want to go to the house. I asked what it was, and all 4 of them said, in sync, that I had to see it for myself. We drove up there, and as we got to it, it's this very old, abandoned white house. I'd say it was probably built in the late 40s, early 50s, but no one's lived in it for years. I asked him to pull into the driveway, and he did. We sat there for a minute. I wanted to see if anything would happen because I didn't believe them. We were in the driveway for 3 minutes at most when Cody said, "I'm about ready to leave, what about y'all?" As soon as he said that, his headlights dimmed so much we thought they went out. I saw someone in the upstairs window only for a second, but someone or something was standing there watching us. It frightened me so much that it brought tears to my eyes, and I was shaking. We sped off and didn't look back. I still remember the feeling of all my energy leaving my body, and I never want to experience something like that ever again. There's a ghost inside of mine and my girlfriend's new home. We've heard stomping in the kitchen in the middle of the night, among lots of other things. The issue that I have is that I wonder why it never shows itself or does anything in my presence. I've come home to doors open, and the animals in the corner shaking. Or I'll hear things in the other room falling, and sure enough, there will be something on the floor, but it never does anything while I'm in the room. My girlfriend, however, has seen the ghost, has had it open doors that she was next to, and heard it whisper. Is my energy off-putting to the ghost, or does my girlfriend attract it through her fear? I do not fear the ghost, and view it as more of an annoyance than anything, whereas she is terrified of it.